So hey, what's up guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel. So in this video we are going to see what if Naruto was the reincarnation of Solf Kimblee. So this will be crossover between Full Metal Alchemist and Naruto. So this will be very interesting video, so watch till end, and I have divided this video in few chapters. So yeah, it will easy to track your last time was. So I mean, you know what I mean. So yeah, without wasting any more time, let's jump right back into the video. But before that, if you are new on this channel, then please make sure to subscribe, leave a like, share. Now let's jump right back into the video.
Chapter 1. The geometry of loneliness. Naruto's first memory was not of a face, it was of white gloves, not clearly, not enough to understand, just flashes that came and went like reflections in broken glass. Pale fingers flexing beneath moonlight, a city lit orange at the edges, a smile that did not belong to any one kind, and underneath it all a feeling so deep and so complete that even as a child he knew it was older than he was. Peace. Not the peace Iruka-sensei talked about on memorial days, with soft voices and bowed heads and the names of the dead spoken like prayers. A different kind. The peace of a thing becoming exactly what it had always been meant to become. The peace of fire finding dry wood. The peace of a wall surrendering to pressure. The peace of destruction when it was honest enough to stop pretending it was anything else. He would wake from those dreams in the dark of his apartment, staring up at the cracked ceiling, listening to the pipes knock in the walls and the wind scrape against the old window frame, and feel not frightened but homesick. He did not know for what. At 4 years old, that struck him as an interesting problem, so he began collecting data. He did not call it that. He did not have the language yet, but he observed, measured, compared. Most children, he noticed, reacted to fear by crying or running or shouting until an adult intervened. Most children sought comfort the way plants sought light, automatically, without calculation. Naruto found this behavior structurally unsound. Adults were inconsistent variables. Comfort was neither stable nor renewable. To build one's emotional framework on access to others was to design a house on wet soil. He learned that lesson early. There were days in Konoha when shopkeepers simply looked through him as if he were not there, and there were days when they saw him very clearly and wished they had not. The first kind confused him as a toddler. The second kind stopped doing so by the time he was 6. The woman at the vegetable stand once slapped his hand away from an apple before he had even touched it. "Don't," she snapped. He stood there, blinking at her fingers still curled from the strike. She was afraid. Not of theft, not of childish messiness. Something older than that, deeper and less rational. It made the skin around her eyes tighten, made her mouth flatten in the exact same pattern he had seen on old men and mothers and shinobi walking home from the memorial stone. It was a shared expression, almost ritualistic. A village-wide tick, interesting. He had begun by then to think of Konoha as a machine made of people. Each one believed themselves to be an individual component. Most of them were wrong. They moved in repeating patterns. They transmitted emotional responses like linked gears. Fear here was inherited, not reasoned. Hatred, likewise, often required less conviction than habit. Naruto took the apple anyway, set exact payment on the counter, and left before the woman could decide whether outrage or silence better served her dignity. He bit into it while walking home and found it mealy. That disappointed him far more than the slap. By the time he entered the academy, the instructors had already decided what he was: trouble, too loud, too impulsive. A lonely boy compensating badly. This assessment endured for almost 3 weeks. Then Mizuki found Naruto in an empty classroom after hours, standing on a chair with a bucket of water balanced above the sliding door, adjusting the angle by fractions of a centimeter. "What are you doing?" Mizuki asked. Naruto looked down. "Testing." "For what?" "The amount of displacement necessary for the bucket to tip at the exact moment the door opens halfway rather than fully." He considered, then added with grave fairness, There is a 32% chance this will fail because the hinge friction changed last week after maintenance. Mizuki stared at him. Naruto, thinking he had perhaps been unclear, pointed at a set of chalk marks on the floor. I have recorded door velocity over the last 11 uses. Mizuki removed the bucket very slowly. What kind of prank requires velocity calculations? Naruto tilted his head, genuinely puzzled by the question. A reliable one. The prank culture of the academy improved dramatically after that, not in frequency. In quality, he did not set off stink bombs in hallways or tie shoelaces together or put frogs in desk drawers. Those methods were crude, low yield, and depended too heavily on randomness. Naruto preferred precision. He once adjusted all the classroom windows by imperceptible amounts, so that when the north wind came through at noon, it produced a harmonic whistle in F-sharp that lasted the entire lecture and made Uruka's left eye twitch visibly. Another time he rerouted the watering channels in the academy garden so that the training yard flooded exactly enough to reveal which students shifted their stance poorly on unstable ground. That second one had begun as an experiment. The fact that Kiba fell over twice and blamed the puddles rather than his footwork was merely an added benefit. Uruka could not decide whether Naruto was maturing or becoming more difficult to classify. The answer, had anyone asked Naruto, was both. He was not friendless, exactly. Friendship implied reciprocity of a type he had not yet found compelling, but he was not isolated either. People interested him enormously. He simply disliked most of the reasons they offered for the things they did. Sakura Haruno intrigued him before she ever properly spoke to him. Not because she was brilliant, though she was in sharp, disciplined ways most teachers overlooked because she blushed too often and sat too straight, but because she was honest in private. Naruto observed her the way he observed most useful phenomena, carefully, without announcing it. Sakura lied constantly in social settings. Children all did. They lied about bravery, talent, indifference, romantic interest, resentment. They lied because social cohesion demanded decorative falsehoods. Naruto understood that. What made Sakura unusual was that when she was alone, her face changed. The performance ceased. She looked exactly as afraid or uncertain or determined as she actually was. No wasted motion. No internal propaganda. That, Naruto thought, was elegant. Sasuke Uchiha interested him for the opposite reason. Sasuke's silence was not honesty, it was architecture. Deliberate. Reinforced. He carried himself the way fortresses were built, every visible surface smooth, every entry point disguised, every weakness buried under layers of intention. Other children admired him or envied him. Naruto watched the way he loaded weight onto his right foot when standing still, the minute-guarding instinct around his left side, the microsecond delay whenever conversation came too close to the word clan, damage, specific, unresolved. Being used as fuel, very inefficient, Naruto thought. Very human. He said none of this aloud. Most people disliked being read more than being insulted. The academy curriculum bored him often and fascinated him intermittently. History was mostly institutional mythology with occasional useful data buried beneath patriotic varnish. Basic chakra theory was insultingly imprecise. Taijutsu was better. The body, unlike politics, was usually honest about its limits. Shuriken practice had beauty when taught properly. Arc, velocity, rotational symmetry, there was comfort in problems whose answers did not pretend to be moral. Ninjutsu, however, offended him, not because it was weak, because it was untidy. The instructors taught hand seals as if sequence alone mattered. They spoke of molding chakra in broad emotional metaphors. Flow, intent, concentration, control. None of them described what Naruto felt when he closed his eyes and reached inward. He did not feel flow. He felt structure, lines, intersections, pressure differentials. Chakra pathways did not seem to him like streams or flames or breath. They seemed like diagrams, a living arrangement of vectors and loads and thresholds, more akin to architecture than energy. When Mizuki told the class to imagine chakra as water, Naruto tried and failed. Water was too shapeless. Chakra in the body was not shapeless at all. It had geometry. It wanted geometry. It behaved according to relationships, not sentiment. Once, at age 7, he raised his hand and asked Uruka whether the standard leaf concentration exercise might be improved by mapping rotational bias in the user's tenketsu alignment before assigning output direction. The room went quiet. Uruka said carefully, "That's not how we usually explain it." Naruto nodded. "Yes, that appears to be part of the problem." Uruka sent him outside for disrespect. Naruto found the punishment fair in principle and intellectually disappointing in execution. He began doing his own experiments after that. His apartment, already shabby, became steadily stranger. Chalk circles appeared under tables and behind the bed frame, not decorative and not quite fuinjutsu either. He was not copying seal formulas from scrolls. He had no access to the advanced material, and what little he glimpsed in library books struck him as useful but incomplete. These were his own constructions, the product of instinct more than education. Ratios, nodes, tiny calculations translated into line work. Most failed. A few fizzed. One caused a teacup to fracture into 6 identical pieces without shattering outward, which delighted him for nearly an hour. He recorded everything in cheap notebooks. Observation. Ceramic composition inconsistent but responsive to concentrated chakra under circular pressure model. Hypothesis. Matter is less resistant than chakra teachers claim. It merely resists inelegant requests. At 8, he accidentally blew the lock off his own bathroom door. The explosion was very small. Clean, contained, almost polite. The metal latch popped free and embedded itself in the opposite wall with a neat thunk. Steam drifted through the doorway from the bath he had drawn. Naruto stared at the ruined lock, then at his hand, then at the chalk pattern under his bare feet. He felt the dream memory again, white gloves, a city burning, peace. But now there was something new braided through it, recognition. Not of the image, of the logic. Of the relationship between pattern and release, between stable form and decisive violation. Something in him had always known this, not as knowledge with words around it, but as appetite, as affinity. He sat down on the bathroom floor and began laughing softly to himself, not because it was funny, because he had finally found a sentence in the language his bones had been trying to speak since birth. From that point onward, his development accelerated. He still failed the exercises other children passed. The clone technique, in particular, became a point of recurring conflict between him and the academy. The problem, contrary to every teacher's increasingly exhausted assumption, was not a lack of chakra. Naruto had chakra in absurd abundance. Even before he fully understood why, he knew that. The problem was conceptual. "Why would I make an exact duplicate?" he asked for the 3rd time during one afternoon exam. "Because that is the technique," Uruka said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "But the duplication principle is structurally lazy. It assumes repetition is useful simply because it increases number. Identical copies share identical weaknesses. They're not meant to be permanent, independent combat assets, Naruto." "That makes it worse." The class snickered. Uruka's patience performed visible acrobatics. "Just do the jutsu." Naruto tried. What appeared beside him was technically a clone only by the most charitable definition. It had his face, his hair, his clothes, and the wrong center of gravity, asymmetric chakra density, and one arm thinner than the other because Naruto had unconsciously altered the chakra balance mid-construction out of sheer aesthetic dissatisfaction. The clone looked at him with his own blue eyes, swayed once and dissolved into smoke. Naruto frowned. Still philosophically offensive. Uruka gave him a 0. Naruto bowed his head. Fair. This refusal to argue about grades unsettled the staff more than loud defiance would have. He accepted consequence the way engineers accepted failed bridge models, as information. He was not ashamed of mistakes. He was interested in them. That made discipline difficult. One could not shame a child who regarded error as a useful part of design. The incident with the substitution exam nearly got him expelled. He was 10. The assignment had been simple. Perform a standard kawarimi no jutsu with the target post on command. Naruto stepped into position, formed the seals, and vanished. There was a sharp sound from the other end of the yard, less boom than compressed crack, and the training post detonated into a cloud of splinters with such precision that the top half separated cleanly from the bottom and landed upright 2 meters away. The class screamed. Iruka had half a kunai in hand before he realized nobody was hurt. Naruto reappeared standing on the fence, calm as still water. Mizuki shouted, "What did you do?" Naruto answered honestly, "A variation." "That wasn't substitution." "No," Naruto agreed. "It was not." "Then why in the name of—" Naruto glanced down at the remains of the post. "Because replacing myself with a structurally identical piece of wood seemed less informative than replacing the wood's internal cellular arrangement with a pressure-reactive instability." Silence spread over the yard like spilled oil. One of the children began crying. Naruto looked mildly stricken. "I calibrated it." That did not help. Hiruzen Sarutobi read the report that evening with a face so neutral it became, by that very restraint, expressive. He had already been watching the boy. Of course he had. One did not leave the vessel of the 9 tails unobserved. But the reports, until then, had existed in familiar categories. Social isolation, disciplinary concerns, unusual aptitude, emotional anomalies difficult to distinguish from the effects of ostracization. Shinobi villages were, regrettably, efficient at producing damaged children. Naruto's file, until recently, had read like a variation on a tragic institutional theme. This was different. Hiruzen tapped ash into a tray and opened the attached instructor notes. Subject demonstrates advanced independent theorization regarding chakra-matter interaction. Subject is consistently polite and responsive to correction, but does not appear emotionally invested in peer approval, praise, or ordinary competition. Subject's self-developed techniques are increasingly sophisticated and difficult to classify under standard pedagogical frameworks. Supplemental note from Yumino Iruka: he is not malicious. I need that clearly stated. He is not enjoying people's fear. That almost makes it stranger. Hiruzen closed the file and looked out at the village lights. There were some children, he reflected, whom war broke. There were others whom war had simply never needed to touch directly because something in them had arrived already arranged for it. Naruto, however, was not cruel. That was the troublesome part. Cruelty was simple. Cruel people wanted others to hurt because suffering gratified them. Hiruzen had known such men. He had buried most of them. Naruto was not like that. He did not seek pain for pleasure. He sought understanding through fracture. That distinction felt important. It also felt, in practical terms, like poor comfort. At 9 years old, Naruto was cornered in an alley behind a dango shop by 3 older academy students who had grown bold with numbers, and the knowledge that adults seldom arrived in time to matter. The leader's name was Daichai, which Naruto happened to know because he had once seen the boy scored highly in taijutsu and very poorly in written strategy. His 2 companions were less memorable. It was late afternoon. The sun had dropped low enough to throw the alley into striped shadow. The stones underfoot still held warmth from the day. Somewhere nearby, oil hissed in a pan. "Demon," Daichai said. Naruto looked at him, then at the other 2. Then at the exit points of the alley, the wall height, the moisture along the mortar lines, the hairline crack near the drainage grate, the approximate compactness of the earth under the stone. The boys mistook this stillness for fear. It was not. They advanced with the exaggerated confidence of children rehearsing a cruelty they had seen adults perform more elegantly. Naruto crouched. One of them hesitated. "What's he doing?" Naruto put one finger to the dirt between the paving stones and began to draw, a circle first. Then smaller lines within the circle, precise and intersecting, not decorative but functional. His finger moved steadily. Chakra flowed with it, Not enough to flare visibly, only enough to settle into the geometry like ink into paper, Daichai laughed, but there was uncertainty under it now. What is that supposed to be? Naruto finished the final line and looked up. His face held no anger, no panic, no plea, only interest. The ground beneath your right foot, he said softly, is now configured to collapse inward at approximately 600 kilopascals. Silence. Daichai glanced down despite himself. Naruto continued in the same polite tone as though reciting a lesson. A human foot exerts less than that while standing, roughly half, depending on weight distribution, but fear changes gait. It increases muscle tension. It alters pressure transfer. He tilted his head. I have not yet tested by how much. The alley went very still. One of the boys took a step backward so fast he nearly fell. Daichai swallowed. You're lying. That is possible, Naruto said. I am often experimenting. The boy lifted his foot. Nothing happened. Then he set it down again by instinct, hard. The stone beneath him gave with a sharp cracking sound and dropped 3 inches into the packed earth. Daichai shouted and stumbled away. All 3 ran. Naruto remained crouched in the alley for a long moment after they vanished, looking at the small collapsed circle in the ground. It was not much, barely a technique. A threat made half of math and half of theater. The pressure threshold had not been exactly right. The collapse had happened too shallow and too early. But it had worked, not merely as a deterrent. As language, he sat back on his heels. For years there had been something inside him that ordinary words could not touch, not loneliness, though that was there, not anger, though that too, not sadness precisely. Something colder and more exacting. A need not to be loved, but to apprehend. To reach the truth of a thing by locating the seam at which it came apart, in the alley, in the circle of disturbed dirt and the fading echo of frightened footsteps. He finally understood that he did not need to learn other people's language for living. He had one of his own, and it was enough. His first deliberate meditation on the seal happened 6 months later. No teacher instructed him to do it. No scroll described the process. Naruto arrived there the same way he arrived at most of his more dangerous discoveries, by following pattern until pattern ceased to be avoidable. He had always known there was too much chakra inside him, not abstractly. Spatially, it pressed sometimes, not against his muscles or skin, but against his internal sense of proportionality. He would mold chakra for a simple exercise and feel depths beneath it, pressure beneath pressure, an enormous reserve not belonging to the visible framework of a child's body. Most people might have recoiled from that realization. Naruto found it rude of reality to conceal useful infrastructure. So one night he sat cross-legged on the floor of his apartment, lit one candle, placed a notebook beside his knee, slowed his breathing, and followed the geometry inward. The transition was not dramatic, no thunder, no roar, no tearing of consciousness. One moment he was in the dim room with peeling walls. The next he was standing in a vast red dark space where water spread ankle-deep across stone, and the air vibrated with ancient furious life. He looked up. Bars, not just bars, an array. Layered, interlocking. Load-bearing anchors set into symbolic architecture. A prison, yes, but also an equation of remarkable complexity. He could feel its logic immediately, even before he understood its origin. Redundancies in one quadrant, elegant compression through the core. A philosophy of containment expressed as structure at its center. Beyond the gate, something enormous shifted. Eyes opened in darkness like furnaces igniting. "Boy," said a voice vast enough to shake the water. Naruto stared. The creature behind the gate was monstrous, yes, by ordinary standards. More chakra than any natural thing should hold, a pressure system with teeth. But that was not what struck him most. What struck him was the age of the design, not the seal, the being. Ancient anger had a texture. This had the density of centuries. "You're the 9 tails," Naruto said. The eyes narrowed. "I am Kurama, and you will—" "The seal is a containment array," Naruto interrupted, stepping closer to the bars with open curiosity. Remarkably elegant. There are inefficiencies in the northeastern quadrant, though. The designer overcompensated load distribution there. It suggests either caution or a last-minute revision. Silence. Water dripped somewhere in the dark. Kurama stared at him. Naruto craned his head slightly, tracing the lines of the gate. "You've been here since before I was born." "Yes," Kurama said at last, but the word came slower now, less certain of the script it had expected. "That's a long time to be inside an equation," Naruto said. "Doesn't it bore you?" For the first time in longer than Naruto could have imagined, the nine-tailed fox appeared to have no answer. Naruto sat down cross-legged in the water. Kurama's pupils narrowed further. "You are not afraid?" Naruto considered the question as if it deserved accuracy. "Of you specifically, not at present." A low growl rolled through the chamber. "You should be." "Possibly," Naruto allowed, "but fear is most useful when it produces data. At the moment, I am still collecting." He looked up at the gate again. "Who built this?" Kurama said nothing. "Someone brilliant," Naruto murmured. "Someone who thought in symbols and stress points at once." The fox's voice dropped, suspicious now in a different way. "What kind of child are you?" Naruto opened his mouth, paused, closed it. He was not entirely certain, so he answered with the most honest thing available. "One who got curious." Kurama watched him for a long moment, then laughed, a terrible sound but not entirely humorless. "Curious," the fox repeated, "about your own cage?" Naruto looked from the bars to the eyes beyond them. "No," he said, "about yours." That ended the conversation, not dramatically. Kurama did not lunge for the gate or roar out threats or promise death. It simply withdrew a fraction into shadow, unsettled in some old and private place by having been addressed not as a monster or a weapon or a burden, but as a problem worth examining. Naruto woke on his apartment floor before dawn, candle burned low, notebook open beside him. His hand moved before his thoughts had finished arranging themselves. He began writing. Seal space architecture suggests intentional emotional symbolism in addition to mechanical function. Occupant sentient, highly reactive, unexpectedly conversational. Further observation required. He hesitated, then added, extended confinement appears to produce not only rage but isolation. Unknown what that does to a mind of this scale, he stared at the line for several seconds, then underlined it once and closed the notebook. Years passed like that, not quickly but efficiently. Naruto's reputation within the academy grew stranger with each term. He was not top of the class in conventional scoring. Sasuke remained more polished in forms the institution understood how to reward. Sakura surpassed nearly everyone in written precision. Shikamaru, when he bothered, outperformed entire sections while looking half asleep. Naruto drifted through the ranking system like an error in the examiner's arithmetic, too competent to dismiss, too irregular to classify. When graduation approached, the instructors relaxed. Most years, students converged toward predictability as the final exam neared. Fear smoothed eccentricity into compliance. Naruto, regrettably, became more himself under pressure. On the written thesis portion, where students were expected to submit a short analytical exercise on basic battlefield principles, Naruto turned in 14 densely written pages, titled Structural Vulnerability in Chakra Pathway Architecture. Preliminary notes on failure cascades in developing shinobi, Uruka, read the first page. Then the second. Then the section in which Naruto proposed that many academy taught combat forms overprotected visible vectors, while neglecting internal collapse triggers in the chakra circulatory system, and quietly sat down. Mizuki skimmed to the appendix and blanched when he found diagrams. The thesis was not polished in the way a Jonin strategist's report would be polished. It bore the unmistakable marks of youth. Abrupt transitions, an occasional flourish of intellectual vanity, a tendency to assume the reader had made the same conceptual leaps he had. But it was brilliant. More troubling, it was usable. Hiruzen received a copy that evening. He read it once, then again more slowly, By the third read, he had stopped trying to decide whether the work was merely advanced or genuinely dangerous. It was both. The boy wrote about chakra systems the way siege engineers wrote about walls, as structures whose beauty resided not only in function, but in the elegant inevitability of how they failed under sufficient understanding. At the end of the thesis, almost as an afterthought, Naruto had appended a single line: "A closed system is only secure until someone asks the right question of it." Hiruzen exhaled smoke through his nose, folded the pages carefully, and placed them in a drawer. On the front of the drawer, in tidy brushstroke handwriting older than Naruto's entire life, was a label: "Things to worry about later." He slid it shut. Outside, in the village, the children of the graduating class walked home beneath lantern light with Hittite dreams in their heads. Some imagined honor, some imagined revenge, some imagined recognition, some imagined merely surviving long enough to matter. Naruto walked alone, forehead protector in his pocket, hands tucked into his jacket sleeves against the evening wind. He passed the ramen stand and paused. Chuchai waved him over without hesitation, without flinch, without the village-wide distortion of face and voice Naruto had catalogued in so many others. Iame smiled and asked whether he wanted extra chashu to celebrate. Naruto stood there for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded once and took his seat. Steam rose from the bowl when it arrived, clouding his glasses' less vision for a second before clearing. The broth smelled rich: salt, pork, warmth, human things, temporary things, small things. He lifted the chopsticks. For just an instant, with the laughter of the stand around him and the metal plate cool in his pocket and the memory of red eyes waiting behind a gate somewhere inside his own soul, Naruto felt the shape of a life standing at an intersection. One path led toward village narratives, bonds, duty, recognition; another toward study, precision. The clean, terrible honesty of force properly understood. He did not yet know that both roads would become the same road in the end. But he sensed, with the quiet certainty that had guided him since he first cracked a bathroom lock with a chalk circle and a pulse of misdirected chakra, that the world ahead of him was built on assumptions. And assumptions, however ancient, however sacred, were only structures in waiting. Naruto lowered his gaze to the ramen and smiled very slightly to himself, not warmly, not cruelly, with interest, because the world at last was beginning to look solvable. Chapter 2. The forest teaches nothing new. By the time Naruto Uzumaki was assigned to Team 7, most of the academy instructors had settled on a private conclusion they would never have written in an official file. He was not unstable. That would have been easier. Instability was chaos without structure, danger without pattern. It could be managed, watched, medicated, restrained. Naruto was something more difficult for institutions to metabolize: consistent. He behaved as though he had arrived in the world with an internal philosophy already assembled, and every new lesson simply had to find its place within it. That was what made the Jonin uneasy when Hiruzen reviewed the team assignments. Sasuke Uchiha, prodigious, damaged, proud, and still salvageable within familiar frameworks. Sakura Haruno, exceptionally intelligent, emotionally transparent beneath her efforts not to be, and likely to become far more dangerous than her classmates expected. Naruto Uzumaki, impossible to ignore, increasingly impossible to predict, yet not actually incompatible with teamwork so long as the teamwork in question did not insult his sense of logic. Kakashi Hatake received the file and stared at it with one visible eye and the patient despair of a man who had offended fate badly enough for it to start getting creative. The first thing he noticed when he met them in the classroom was that the file had not exaggerated. Sakura looked alert, rigid with the effort of appearing composed in front of Sasuke. Sasuke looked bored in the way only highly gifted adolescents ever managed, an expression less of indifference than of irritated superiority toward time itself. Naruto sat by the window, chin resting lightly against one hand, not fidgeting, not shouting, not trying to provoke attention. He was studying the hinges on the classroom door. When Kakashi arrived 3 hours late, Sakura was annoyed, Sasuke was disdainful, and Naruto merely shifted his gaze to the Jonin's posture, the weight distribution on his legs, the callous patterns on his hands, the eye hidden beneath the slanted forehead protector. Assessment first, Kakashi thought. Efficient. The rooftop introduction went badly in several ordinary ways and one extraordinary one. Sakura introduced herself through a frame of likes and dislikes that remained mostly social camouflage. Sasuke announced that he had ambitions shaped like murder. Kakashi accepted this with the weary calm of someone for whom emotionally compromised children were less surprising than rain. Then Naruto's turn came. Kakashi angled his head. Likes, dislikes, dreams for the future. Naruto was quiet for a moment. I like systems that do not pretend to be simpler than they are, he said at last. I dislike hypocrisy, especially when institutionalized. I enjoy ramen, though I suspect the pleasure is partly ritual rather than culinary. I find structural weaknesses interesting. Sakura blinked, Kakashi said. And your dream? Naruto looked out over the village roofs below. The answer, when it came, was so calm that it took a moment for its implications to register. I would like, he said, to understand what people are for when all their stories about themselves have been removed. Silence. Sakura stared at him. Sasuke's eyes narrowed a fraction, not because he found the statement threatening exactly, but because it occupied the same category as standing too close to an unfenced well. One did not know yet whether there was depth there or merely darkness. Kakashi closed his visible eye in what might have looked like a cheerful smile to the untrained. Inside, he revised the danger assessment upward. The bell test the next morning confirmed two things immediately. First, Sakura and Sasuke behaved exactly as expected, if a bit more competently than average. Sakura hid well. Sasuke attacked directly, violently, and with enough skill to force Kakashi into actual engagement. Second, Naruto did not approach the exercise as a combat trial. He approached it as an engineering problem. At first, Kakashi thought the boy was absent. Then he noticed that several loose stones in the training ground had been moved by perhaps half an inch each, no more. A wire line, thin enough to evade ordinary notice, ran from a tree root to the lower branch of another tree at an angle too subtle to be accidental. The placement of 3 kunai in the dirt formed no obvious trap, but did imply intersecting fields of movement constraint if one assumed the target would respond to Sasuke's assault by pivoting northwest. Kakashi smiled behind the mask. There you are. Sasuke came in with a barrage of shuriken and feints. Kakashi dodged, countered, vanished, reappeared. Sakura lost nerve too early and broke concealment at the wrong time. Sasuke adjusted fast enough to avoid humiliation, but not fast enough to avoid being read. Then Naruto triggered the field. Not a trap. A conversation. The earth under Kakashi's left foot compacted suddenly, reducing traction. A second later, a weighted branch snapped from above, not to hit him, but to redirect his evasive angle. When Kakashi moved toward the apparently open corridor between 2 trees, a cloud of dust burst upward from pre-scored ground, blinding his visible eye for one essential beat. In that beat, Naruto emerged from the side, not for the bells, but for Kakashi's wrist. He did not strike. He touched the Jonin's hand with 2 fingers. Chakra flashed, tiny, precise. The metal clasp of one bell snapped open. It would have fallen into Naruto's palm if Kakashi had been a little slower. He was not. The Jonin twisted away, snagged the bell string, and landed atop the post with fresh interest humming beneath his lazy demeanor. Naruto stood below him, expression calm. That, Kakashi said mildly, was clever. It was the least inefficient approach, Naruto replied. Separating you from the bells mattered more than defeating you. Why not coordinate with your teammates? Naruto looked at Sakura, still catching her breath, then at Sasuke, whose irritation had curdled into sharper offense now that someone else had nearly solved the problem. Because they were, at the time, part of the field conditions rather than part of the solution. Sakura made a strangled noise. Sasuke stepped forward. "Say that again." Kakashi raised a hand before the situation could become needlessly educational. The final outcome of the bell test was in one sense unchanged. Teamwork still had to be learned. Kakashi still staged the lunch scene, still punished selfishness through theatrical cruelty, and then rewarded mutual loyalty when Sakura offered food. And Sasuke looked prepared to break rules rather than watch Naruto starve. But one difference remained with him after the exercise ended. Most genin tried to take the bells. Naruto had tried to redesign the test. That was much harder to train around. Team 7 early missions were not transformative in the way heroic stories preferred. They were dull, repetitive, instructional, and for Naruto, occasionally useful. D ranks taught him the texture of the village better than the academy ever had. Weeding gardens for civilians who stiffened when he came near, chasing escaped animals with movement patterns far more honest than their owners. Repair work, deliveries, the maintenance skeleton of peace. He found it instructive that most shinobi dreamed of glory while spending their lives sustaining logistics. "Disappointed?" Kakashi asked once after a mission involving a merchant's lost cat and 2 hours of fruitless rooftop pursuit. Naruto considered. "No," he said. "It is useful to see what societies actually need when they are not narrating themselves." Kakashi stared at him over his book. Sakura, who had by now learned the basic rule that Naruto's strangest remarks usually concealed the most thought, asked, "And what do they need? Boring things?" Naruto said, "Mostly maintenance." Sasuke scoffed. Naruto glanced at him. "That isn't an insult." The wave mission began, as meaningful disasters often did, under the official label of something smaller: C rank, escort duty, bridge builder, modest risk. Naruto took one look at Tazuna's posture, the compression around his mouth whenever money was mentioned, the faint tremor in his fingers that did not belong to age but to sustained stress, and concluded the mission file was lying by omission, if not by intent. He said so aloud before they even left the gate. Tazuna bristled. Kakashi's visible eye bent in a smile that did not reach the parts of him currently recalculating. The demon brothers' ambush confirmed the discrepancy. The attack itself mattered less to Naruto than the information it yielded. Chunin-level operatives on a declared C rank meant someone upstream had chosen narrative convenience over structural truth. A very common institutional habit. He filed it away. The bridge country itself fascinated him more than the combat. Poverty had geometry too, so did exploitation. Roads worn in uneven patterns. Markets starved of variety. Houses repaired past the point where repair remained meaningfully distinct from ritual. Gato's influence, invisible in paperwork, appeared everywhere in pressure points. Naruto did not romanticize suffering. He simply preferred when it admitted what it was. The confrontation with Zabuza Mamachi took place in mist thick enough to insult visual certainty. Kakashi became trapped in the water prison early, the jutsu shimmering around him like a liquid equation closed at every edge. Canon would have given Naruto panic. This version gave him 45 seconds of concentration so intense that even Sasuke, already moving to improvise, paused to watch. Naruto crouched one hand against the bridge stone, eyes narrowed not at Zabuza but at the prison itself. Water was not random. It only looked random to people who had not studied its surfaces. The prison was a maintained geometry, pressure distributed over chakra-defined boundaries, tensile cohesion stabilized through continuous output from the caster. Break the caster and it collapsed, but direct force risked Kakashi. Break the structure and the caster would have to respond. Naruto chose the second. He pressed chakra into the bridge beneath the prison, not broadly, not explosively, but in a narrow 4-inch column of stone aligned to intersect the prison's outer tension arc at its most load-sensitive point. Then he rewrote the column's internal arrangement into a compression charge calibrated less like a bomb and more like an intrusive question. The detonation was sharp and surgical. Stone erupted upward in a focused lance. It did not smash the prison. It disrupted the water's maintained geometry just enough that surface tension failed asymmetrically. The prison sloshed, twisted, and tore apart on one side. Kakashi hit the ground, rolled free, and turned that sliver of freedom into immediate counteroffense. Afterward, when Zabuza withdrew and the air tasted of wet iron and stress, the missing nin glanced once toward Naruto. "That was creative," Zabuza said. Naruto nodded. "Thank you." There was a pause. Mist drifted between them, Naruto added, because accuracy mattered. "It also had an 8% chance of killing Kakashi-sensei if my calculations were off." Sakura looked appalled. Sasuke looked newly alert in the way prey animals must look when they realize the second wolf is the one worth tracking. Kakashi stared at his student for a long second before deciding that now was not the moment to unpack the sentence. Zabuza barked a rough laugh. "I liked you better before you spoke," Kakashi muttered. Naruto took that as feedback rather than criticism. "Noted." The days in Wave changed Team 7 in ways subtle enough that none of them named them at the time. Sakura, for one, stopped assuming Naruto's silence meant emotional simplicity. She began noticing that he asked her questions no one else did, small ones, always precise. Why did she organize her notes by confidence level rather than topic? Why did a throwing stance improve under observation but worsen when praised? Why did she apologize before offering corrections to people who needed them? She answered, because he listened, as though the answer mattered. That was rarer than affection and, in some ways, more binding. Sasuke's relationship with Naruto grew more complicated by the day. He had entered Team 7 expecting annoyance, perhaps competition. Instead, he found himself observed. Not judged, not challenged in the ordinary way, simply read. Naruto made occasional remarks that landed like senbon in unguarded places. "The rotation in your left kick loses force through the hip," Naruto said during one spar. Sasuke glared. "You're wrong. You had an ankle injury 2 years ago." Sasuke froze. Naruto shrugged. "You compensate before full extension." "How do you know that?" Naruto thought for a moment. "Because your body does." It was difficult to hate someone who never seemed to be trying to humiliate you, more difficult still when he was correct. By the time Team 7 returned to Konoha, battered and wiser in the insufficient ways that first bloodshed usually made children wiser, the village saw heroes in training. Kakashi saw a pattern accelerating, so did Hiruzen. Which was why, when the Chunin exams were proposed, neither man pretended this was merely an opportunity for advancement. It was an observation chamber. The written exam amused Naruto. Not because it was easy, although it was, once one understood that the point was not the answers themselves, but the conditions under which people sought them. But because it was transparent in a way many institutional tests were not. Ibiki Morino had built a psychological pressure device disguised as a classroom exercise. Fear, deception, self-exposure, strategic cheating, group manipulation. Elegant, really? Naruto did not bother pretending not to understand. He answered what interested him, ignored what did not, and spent the final question studying the emotional geometry of the room as panic moved through it in waves. The second phase, the Forest of Death, felt to him upon first entering less like a trial than an apology from the universe for the monotony of civilized training. Humidity thickened the air. Sound behaved badly under the canopy. Everything was alive and everything was armed. Predatory plants, oversized insects, unstable terrain, ambush-minded genin, and the great neutral fact of wilderness that did not care who believed themselves important. Sakura shivered once as they crossed the threshold. Sasuke narrowed his eyes and scanned for threats. Naruto inhaled. The scent of damp soil, rot moss, blood somewhere far off, living chemistry in countless incompatible forms. "Well," he said quietly, "this is refreshingly honest." The first hours revealed exactly why teams failed. Most genin entered the forest thinking in terms of enemies. They imagined combat as discrete, intentional, human. The forest corrected them. Leeches, footing collapse, poisonous spores, hidden nests, distance miscalculations under obstructed sight lines. 100 small systems attempted to kill them without malice, ideology, or vendetta. Naruto found this clarifying. They acquired their first scroll with startling efficiency. Not through brute confrontation, though Sasuke was ready for that. Naruto noticed a rival team's movement pattern near a marsh sector, and identified by their spacing that they were traveling defensively while preserving one member's dominant hand. Scroll carrier. Tired. Right flank overcommitted. He altered the ground ahead of them, just enough to create a false sync gradient. The team diverted exactly as predicted into a choke point where Sasuke intercepted, and Sakura disabled the rear member with textbook precision. The exchange lasted under a minute. When it was over, Sakura stared at the enemy team's dropped scroll, then at Naruto. You knew they'd move there. Naruto tucked their prize away. Yes. How? They were afraid in a pattern. That did not answer her question. It did, however, sound like something she suspected he might mean literally. They made camp in a ruined root hollow after nightfall. Sakura checked traps twice. Sasuke cleaned blood off a kunai and pretended not to be tired. Naruto wrote in his notebook by moonlight. Sakura looked over before she could stop herself. What are you writing? Observations. About the exam, in part. What else? Naruto's pencil moved once more before he answered. How little survival differs from engineering. Sasuke gave a derisive sound. Survival is strength. Naruto looked up at him. Firelight caught his eyes and made them seem paler than usual. No, he said. Survival is a failure to die. Strength is only one of many mechanisms by which death misses. Sasuke opened his mouth, then shut it. Sakura did not sleep well. The encounter with Orochimaru began before any of them knew his name. Killing intent moved ahead of him through the forest like a pressure front before a storm. Birds vanished first. Insects stopped. Even the background noise of the place altered, as if the ecosystem itself understood that something outside its ordinary hierarchy had entered the region. Sakura froze. Sasuke's body went rigid with furious effort not to do exactly that. Naruto turned slowly toward the trees. A figure emerged with the patient theatricality of someone who understood the value of fear as staging. Grass in disguise. Smile too long. Eyes that had spent too many years treating bodies as replaceable housing. Orochimaru, most children meeting him for the first time saw power first. Naruto saw motive. The man's chakra was extraordinary, yes, dense, cold, serpentine in the most literal energetic sense. But what struck Naruto was not magnitude, it was architecture. Orochimaru's techniques, posture, even his stillness all converged on the same central fact: preservation. Extension. Refusal of ending. Every layer of him had been built around the rejection of one irreversible law. Interesting, Naruto thought, small but interesting. Orochimaru spoke in the oily cadence of a predator enjoying the moment before contact. Sasuke responded with pride and rage. Sakura with panic sharpened into useless courage. Naruto listened for less than a minute before interrupting. You're afraid of dying. The forest seemed to lean in. Orochimaru's smile remained. Something behind it did not. How rude, the Sannin said. Naruto tilted his head. Not rude, accurate. Sasuke shot him a look that plainly translated to, "Are you insane?" Naruto continued with the calm of someone explaining a theorem. Everything about you is arranged around that fear. The body transfer technique, the experimentation, the pursuit of prohibited knowledge. You've built an enormous structure around one foundational weakness. He paused. That's aesthetically disappointing. Sakura, horrified, whispered, Naruto. Orochimaru laughed softly. It was the wrong laugh, too controlled. The kind adults used when a child had touched something they had thought well hidden. And what? Orochimaru asked. Do you know of aesthetics? Naruto looked at him for a long moment, enough to recognize when someone mistakes obsession for transcendence. That was when Orochimaru attacked. The fight, if one insisted on calling it that, was unlike anything Sakura had ever imagined battle to be. There was speed, yes. Violence, too. But beneath both ran something stranger, conversation through structure. Orochimaru struck to terrify and destabilize, moving with that fluid, inhuman grace that made ordinary defense feel provincial. Sasuke met him first and was brushed aside with humiliating ease, not because he lacked courage, but because courage is not a substitute for scale. Sakura moved to intercept and found herself one heartbeat from death before Naruto altered the terrain under Orochimaru's landing point, forcing the Sannin to redirect mid-motion. From there, the forest ceased to be scenery. Naruto's chakra moved through roots, stone, and packed earth in invisible calculations. Trees cracked at precisely inconvenient angles. Ground compacted, then loosened, not randomly but to erase escape vectors. Branches became pressure nodes. Mud banks transformed into reactive surfaces that shifted under Orochimaru only when his weight committed past correction. He was not trying to kill the Sannin. He was building a room around him. Orochimaru realized that halfway through and became, for the first time in years, genuinely alert. How old, he thought, evading a sudden eruption of stone that did not strike him so much as close the corridor behind him. "How old is this child?" "Your movement habits," Naruto said, dodging a snake strike by margins so narrow Sakura could barely breathe. "Reveal that you privilege flexibility over commitment." Orochimaru's tongue flicked out, amused despite himself. "And that is a flaw. It means you require exits." Naruto slammed his palm to the ground. Chakra arrays flashed crimson through the forest floor, brief, geometric, almost beautiful. 4 surrounding trunks detonated not outward but inward at their cores, collapsing into an angled cage of shattered wood and stone. Simultaneously, the ground beneath Orochimaru's rear step compressed into a false plane, forcing him forward into the only remaining corridor, which also collapsed. Not enough to trap a lesser shinobi, more than enough to make the intent clear. No escape geometry. Orochimaru landed atop a broken slab of earth in the center of a narrowing lattice, hair disheveled, smile gone. Naruto stood 10 meters away, breathing lightly. Sasuke, from where he had pushed himself up on shaking arms, understood with sudden cold clarity that Naruto had not been fighting to win in the ordinary sense. He had been studying. Every dodge had yielded data. Every counter had shaped the field. Every exchange had been less a contest than a progressive reduction of possibility. This was what terrified Sasuke most, not the power, the patience. Orochimaru could have escalated, could have dropped the disguise completely, pressed the mismatch in scale until children became corpses. He knew that. Naruto knew it too, which was why the boy did the most unsettling thing possible. He let the structure stop short of completion. The final collapse never came. The corridor to the east remained barely, deliberately open. Naruto lowered his hand. "I've learned enough for now," he said. Even Orochimaru stared at him. Sakura found her voice first, though it came out ragged. "What are you doing?" Naruto did not look away from the Sannin. "Allowing continued relevance?" The words should not have landed as hard as they did, but they did, because the tone was not arrogance. It was simple statement, as if Orochimaru's future existence had become one more variable Naruto was choosing for the moment not to eliminate from the equation. Orochimaru straightened slowly. Sasuke expected fury, killing intent, retaliation. Instead, the Sannin's expression settled into something worse, a sliver of disturbed fascination. "You are a remarkable child," Orochimaru said. Naruto's answer came gentle as snowfall. "You are a much less remarkable man than you believe." And there it was, the seam found and pressed. Orochimaru vanished. No curse mark burned itself into Sasuke's neck. No theatrical claim of future ownership. No grand pronouncement. He left as predators leave when they discover, in the underbrush, another thing with teeth configured wrongly. The silence after his departure was nearly as terrible as his presence had been. Sakura sat down hard on the roots behind her and began to cry with the exhausted, furious helplessness of someone whose nerves had been stretched past dignity. Sasuke stood very still. Naruto took out his notebook. Sakura looked up through tears, incredulous. "You cannot possibly be writing right now." Naruto paused. "I will forget details later if I don't." She made a sound halfway between laughter and despair. Sasuke spoke without looking at him. "Why didn't you finish it?" Naruto's pencil slowed. "Orochimaru?" "Yes." Naruto considered the question seriously, which infuriated Sasuke further because it implied the answer existed independent of emotion. "Because he is incomplete in an instructive way," Naruto said, "and because killing him there would have required assumptions I had not verified." Sasuke turned to face him fully. "That's not a reason." "It is to me." Sakura wiped at her face. "Normal people would say because he was dangerous." Naruto looked at her with something close to apology. "That was also true." They reached the tower 2 days later with the Earth and Heaven scrolls secured, scraped raw in body and changed in ways none of them yet understood. Sakura looked older. Sasuke looked as though some invisible measurement inside him had been disturbed and would not reset. Naruto looked almost serene. While the other teams recovered, argued, boasted, or hid their shaking hands, he sat against the wall with his notebook open across one knee, humming under his breath as he wrote. Sakura stared at him for a while before asking the question that had been living under her tongue since the forest. "Were you scared?" Naruto glanced up. She gestured vaguely, encompassing Orochimaru, the forest, perhaps all of it. "At all." He was quiet long enough that she thought he might ignore her, then he shut the notebook. "Yes," he said. Sasuke, across the room, looked over sharply. Sakura blinked. "You were." Naruto nodded once. "Fear is information. The useful question is whether it distorts the reading." She studied his face, trying to decide whether that answer was evasive or the most direct thing he knew how to say. "What were you afraid of?" she asked. Naruto's gaze drifted to the tower window, to the strip of gray daylight beyond. "That I might meet something genuinely new," he said softly, "and fail to understand it before it ended." Sakura did not know what to do with that, neither did Sasuke. Much later, when the proctors announced the preliminaries, and the machinery of the exams lurched onward, the room's atmosphere changed again, toward competition, toward politics, toward the next layer of necessary violence. But something irreversible had happened in the forest. Sakura had seen that Naruto's strangeness was not emptiness. It was conviction, cold and coherent, and sometimes, in twisted ways, kinder than ordinary people's lies. Sasuke had seen what it meant to encounter someone who did not want the same things he wanted, and yet could still look at him as though there were something worth finding there. And Naruto had found confirmation of a principle he had suspected since childhood. The forest, for all its teeth and poison and spectacle, had not taught him anything fundamentally new. It had merely demonstrated at scale what he had already begun to understand in alleys, classrooms, and the seal space behind his own ribs. Every system believed itself inevitable from the inside. Every predator thought its hunger made it profound. Every defense mistook continuity for perfection. And all of them, given sufficient patience, sufficient curiosity, and the willingness to ask the right question at the right pressure point, eventually revealed their seam. Naruto closed his notebook and rose when his team was called. The next phase awaited. He found that pleasing, not because he expected victory. Victory was dull as a concept, too often confused with moral worth. No, what pleased him was simpler. The world kept presenting itself as closed architecture, and it kept being wrong. Chapter 3. The perfect floor, the preliminary arena beneath the Chunin exam tower, was built, like most official Konoha spaces, with a kind of unconscious optimism. It was circular, balanced, stone-floored and practical without being ugly. The balconies above gave observers a clear angle on every point of engagement. The walls were reinforced just enough to withstand genin-level combat without advertising their own reinforcement. It was an architecture designed to imply that competition, however violent, remained orderly under institutional supervision. Naruto noticed the cracks before he noticed the proctors, not physical cracks. Conceptual ones, too many injured teams, too much accumulated fatigue. Too many candidates for the available time. The exam structure had been forced into compression, which meant the next stage could no longer pretend to evaluate slow development. It would have to privilege spectacle, survivability, and control under pressure. This was no longer a pedagogical environment. It was a sorting mechanism. He found that refreshing. Around him, the survivors of the forest of death occupied the room in little islands of posture and damage. Some were trying very hard to look composed. Others had already accepted the indignity of visible fear. The sound team radiated hostility in overlapping frequencies. The Sand siblings were quieter, which made them more significant. Lee looked as though his enthusiasm had personally bullied exhaustion into retreat. Ino and Sakura had both gone pale in ways neither would forgive later. Sasuke, to Naruto's mild interest, was still scanning the room as though he expected Orochimaru to resolve out of the wall itself. That expectation, Naruto thought, was not irrational, merely inefficient. Sakura stood closer to him than she had during the first phase. Not obviously. Not enough that anyone else would mark it. But she had shifted, almost imperceptibly, into the radius people unconsciously built around the things they believed were dangerous enough to be safer near than far. Naruto did not object. Hayate Gecko coughed into one hand and explained the preliminaries in the detached tone of a man whose body had stopped expecting kindness from the world some time ago. Single elimination. Immediate bouts. Winner proceeds. Simple enough for the room. False, of course. In the way, all supposedly simple systems were false. Every fight would produce data beyond victory and defeat, about temperament, restraint, tactical flexibility, hidden loyalties, outside influences, leadership habits, and the exact threshold at which a child stopped being one kind of person and became another. Naruto lifted his gaze to the balcony. The Jonin and special observers were already there. Kakashi leaned with deceptive slouch against the rail, visible eye calm and too attentive. Kurenai was watching her genin with protective focus. Guy looked like a man containing either tears or detonation. The third Hokage sat at the center, old hands folded, face unreadable. Beside him stood Anko with the look of someone both fascinated and offended by half the room, and then, farther back in the shadows, men who did not stand like instructors, observers, Naruto thought, not village civilians. Not ordinary Anbu either. Interesting. The first fight began, and with it, the room's ambient tension reorganized into concentration. Naruto watched all of them, not because he cared who advanced. Advancement mattered less than revealed structure. Dasu's sound-based attack pattern was clever, but overcommitted to surprise. Choji's mass conversion altered floor stress before it altered threat radius. Kankuro used puppet angles with enough precision to suggest habitual deception, which Naruto approved of in theory if not theatrics. Shino fought like a theorem proving itself without raising its voice. When Sakura and Ino faced each other, the room's emotional field changed. Rivalry, identity, memory, gendered performance, friendship refracted through competition, more social architecture than tactical. Naruto saw Sakura make the familiar mistake of trying to justify herself while fighting, as if explanation could coexist with decisive force. She nearly lost for it, then nearly won for the same reason. When her frustration finally outran her self-consciousness, her chakra became cleaner. Useful note, Naruto thought, Sasuke's match drew the most attention. Understandably. He fought with compressed violence, more brittle than graceful, the aftermath of the forest still living in his muscles. There was strain there now, a sharpening beyond ordinary ambition. He moved like someone already in dialogue with an absence. Orochimaru had not marked him physically, but something had happened nonetheless. Sasuke had been seen by something older and uglier than he had planned for, and now every kick, every feint, every breath seemed designed to prove that the encounter had not altered him. It had. Naruto suspected Sasuke knew that too. When his own name finally appeared on the electronic board opposite Kiba in Yuzuka, the room responded almost audibly. Some candidates leaned forward. Others shifted back. Kiba grinned with canine confidence sharpened by previous contempt. Akamaru growled from atop his head. To Kiba, Naruto still occupied the category of class fool upgraded by recent rumor into class freak. Dangerous, perhaps, but in a diffuse and socially comprehensible way. Naruto walked to the arena center and stopped. Hayate raised a hand. Begin. Kiba moved first and loudly, which was consistent with his personality, and therefore tactically suboptimal. He came in on a diagonal rush with Akamaru splitting his angle, aiming to overwhelm through speed and sensory pressure before Naruto could begin whatever unsettling process people had started whispering about after the forest. Naruto let him, not idly, deliberately. He shifted backward in small increments, not to retreat, but to map. Kiba's first strike favored right-side commitment. Akamaru corrected for blind spots with admirable instinct but poor strategic independence. Their coordinated assault depended on rhythm, and rhythm was only another kind of exposed pattern. The first hit Naruto landed was not a blow. He tapped the floor with his heel. A hairline pulse moved through the stone, too small for the crowd to notice, but enough to change surface friction along the exact arc of Kiba's next pivot. The boy's foot slipped a fraction, not enough to fall, enough to force an overcorrection through the knee. Naruto sidestepped the follow-up and spoke almost conversationally. "Your center of balance is too high when you accelerate," Kiba snarled. "Shut up!" Akamaru lunged. Naruto turned his wrist, released a thread of chakra into the floor, and a narrow ridge of stone lifted just enough to interrupt the dog's landing. Akamaru stumbled, rolled, recovered fast. Better than expected, Naruto noted. Kiba spun into fang over fang with all the blunt, admirable commitment of a person who believed escalation solved complexity. The drill-like rotation tore through the air toward Naruto's chest. He did not block. He dropped. At the same instant, he pressed 2 fingers to the floor and sent a sharp compression pulse into the exact point where Kiba's spinning trajectory would end. When Kiba came out of the rotation, the stone beneath him erupted upward in a tight cone no wider than a dinner plate. It did not injure him severely. That was not the design. It simply launched his recovery angle into failure. Kiba crashed sideways. Naruto was already there, one hand at Kiba's wrist, the other against his shoulder. Not striking, just fixing the body in place long enough to speak. "Your style is excellent for immediate dominance," he said quietly. "It becomes predictable once your confidence commits before your body does." Then he released him and stepped back. The room had gone strangely silent. Kiba pushed himself up, face flushed with rage and embarrassment, and attacked again harder than before, exactly the reaction Naruto had expected. The second half of the match lasted under 30 seconds. Naruto shaped the engagement into narrowing lanes, cut off Kiba's stronger approach angles, and finished with a low-yield shock burst beneath the boy's feet that took his legs out without damaging the joints. Hayate called the match. Kiba lay on the stone, breathing hard, humiliated not by mockery but by the unbearable clarity with which the fight had dissected him. Naruto offered a hand. Kiba slapped it away, which was emotionally understandable and physically difficult from the floor. Naruto withdrew it at once. "Fair." In the balcony above, Kakashi exhaled slowly. Kurenai folded her arms tighter. Guy whispered, for reasons known only to Guy, "Youth is becoming increasingly strange." The preliminaries continued. Naruto's attention sharpened fully when Hyuga Neji entered the field. He had been observing Neji already, of course. One would have had to be blind, careless, or politically affiliated with the Hyuga main house to miss the elegance of the boy's structure. His posture alone conveyed a closed system, efficient angles, no wasted movement. Emotion compressed into discipline so complete that it passed to less careful eyes for serenity. Neji was not serene. He was certain. That was more dangerous. The gentle fist fascinated Naruto before he ever saw it in true engagement. A fighting style built not on blunt trauma but on targeted interruption of the chakra architecture itself was the nearest thing the shinobi system had produced to the kind of thinking Naruto respected. It was surgical, intimate, philosophical in its own way. Most forms of violence treated the body as a wall to be battered. The gentle fist treated it as a network to be edited. Beautiful, Naruto thought, and immediately after there will be a seam. Neji's preliminary match confirmed both assumptions. He moved with merciless control, closing Tenketsu like a calligrapher finishing strokes. His opponent never truly entered the fight. He was merely allowed to discover, step by step, that his body had already begun leaving it. When Neji won, Naruto found himself not excited but attentive in a deeper register. Here, finally, was someone whose worldview might actually be worth opposing. The tournament board for the final stage was posted later, once the preliminaries ended and medics had finished putting adolescents back into roughly portable shapes. Naruto read the bracket once, his opponent. Hyuga Neji, he smiled, not widely, not theatrically, just enough to acknowledge a pleasing inevitability. Sakura beside him noticed, "You're happy about that." "Yes." "Because you think you can beat him," Naruto took a moment before answering. "Because he believes something coherent." That did not reassure her. The month before the finals changed the village's emotional weather. Publicly, the Chunin exams remained what they had always pretended to be: celebration, alliance theater, proof of Konoha's continuing vitality. Privately, they became preparation, visiting dignitaries, Anbu traffic, political recalculation. The village polished itself for outside eyes while quietly reinforcing all the places those eyes were not meant to see. Naruto trained. Jiraiya arrived during that interval like a rumor with poor grooming. He had already heard things. Orochimaru's unfinished report to his own scattered networks had generated whispers. Kakashi's terse summaries had reached Hiruzen. Hiruzen, reluctantly and with the exhausted wisdom of old men who knew when problems required irregular tools, had sent for one of the few people alive qualified to look at Naruto and not mistake his strangeness for novelty. Their first meeting happened near the hot springs because the world, Naruto observed, was committed to symbolism even when it embarrassed itself. Jiraiya turned, squinted at him, and for 3 long seconds said nothing. Naruto looked back with equal directness. "So," Jiraiya said at last, "you're the kid." "Yes, you're weirder than the reports." They were abbreviated. Jiraiya barked a laugh despite himself. "You have any idea who I am?" "One of the Sannin," Naruto said. "Writer, spy, teacher, probable voyeur, ideological romantic with a stronger tactical mind than your public persona suggests." Jiraiya stared. Naruto added, because accuracy mattered, "Also my father's teacher." Something changed behind Jiraiya's eyes then. Not surprise exactly, more the quiet recognition that this conversation would not obey adult hierarchies unless he enforced them manually. "Walk with me," he said. They spent hours talking over the next weeks, though talking implied a comfort the exchanges rarely possessed. Jiraiya tried at first to teach through narrative. The will of fire, inherited bonds, the meaning of protecting the village as an extension of protecting one another. Naruto listened with genuine attention, which would have been more gratifying had he not then asked infuriatingly precise questions. "Has the will of fire reduced war frequency?" he asked once, "or only improved voluntary compliance with sacrifice?" Jiraiya glared over the fire. "You always ask things like that, only when answers matter." The older man learned, slowly, that Naruto was not rejecting meaning. He was rejecting decorative meaning. There was a difference. If one explained a technique to him through sentiment, he lost interest. Explain the structure beneath it, the operational logic, the failure conditions, the relationship between output and identity, and he absorbed it almost instantly. Sage principles intrigued him, not because of nature as harmony, which he found rhetorically overused, but because natural energy represented a scale shift in available material. Another lattice. Another substrate. Another question with enough pressure behind it to be worth asking later. Jiraiya, watching him learn, developed the uncomfortable certainty that he was not teaching a boy how to become stronger. He was handing a philosopher more precise instruments. The final stadium filled with civilians, shinobi, dignitaries, and predators wearing state-approved expressions. Naruto stood in the tunnel before his match and listened to the crowd above. Applause had geometry too, so did expectation. People wanted narratives they already understood. Underdog defies genius. Hard work challenges fate. Loud village outcast proves his heart. The machinery of communal symbolism was already spinning around him, eager to reduce a real event into digestible myth. He found the urge not insulting so much as boring. Neji waited across the field when Naruto emerged into the light. The Hyuga prodigy stood perfectly balanced, pale eyes calm. Expression composed into that particular stillness people mistook for enlightenment when what they were actually seeing was disciplined contempt. Naruto took his place opposite him. For a moment before Hayate called the start, the stadium fell oddly quiet, because even at a distance, something in the matchup felt wrong in a compelling way. Not hero against prodigy, system against system. Hayate raised his hand. Begin. Neji moved first with the confidence of someone whose worldview had never once asked permission from uncertainty. His opening sequence was textbook Hyuga in the way textbook Hyuga became terrifying at genius level. Minimal motion, maximal interruption. Palms cut toward Naruto's chakra points with impossible efficiency. The Byakugan was already active, veins raised at his temples, his vision drilling through flesh into network. Naruto gave ground. The crowd murmured immediately, interpreting retreat according to habit. Sakura gripped the rail above. Sasuke, beside her, narrowed his eyes and said nothing. He had learned in the forest not to misread Naruto's first movements. Neji's first strikes landed, not because Naruto failed to evade, but because he allowed the pattern to close. Two tenketsu at the shoulder, one near the rib line, another at the forearm. Pain flared bright and exact. Chakra flow stuttered. Neji pressed the advantage with calm inevitability, each palm a denial. "You cannot win," he said, voice low enough that only Naruto heard it clearly. "From the beginning, your structure was inferior." Naruto breathed once through the pain. "Inherent destiny," Neji continued, each word punctuated by contact. "The world is arranged before we enter it. Some are born to stand above, some beneath. Resistance is merely ignorance performing itself." Another strike, another closure. The crowd began to lean toward the script it knew. The Hyuga prodigy dismantling the unpredictable failure. The superior bloodline proving what bloodlines were for. Naruto kept moving, not to attack, to position. That was when Neji's expression changed a fraction. Because his opponent was not fighting like someone losing, he was selecting coordinates. Another 8 points closed. Then 12. Then 17. Naruto's breathing roughened. His chakra network constricted under the precision assault. Any ordinary genin would have folded there, their offense gone, their mobility reduced to desperation. Naruto's smile appeared tiny. Real. Neji saw it and felt, for the first time in the match, uncertainty open like a cut. He committed to chitin. The rotation exploded outward into the famed absolute defense, chakra flaring in a perfect sphere of repulsion and spin. To the audience it looked invincible because it had been designed to look that way. Motion without entry. Defense as total geometry. The Hyuga style announcing that certainty could become shape. Naruto had been waiting for exactly this. A circle, he thought, has a center. He slammed both hands to the arena floor. What happened next was so fast the crowd understood it only in fragments. Earlier in the match, while yielding ground and accepting chakra point closures, Naruto had used each forced footfall to alter the stone beneath Neji's movement lattice. Not broadly enough for Byakugan to catch amid active combat, and not in the external vectors the defense was built to reject. He had placed a vibration-reactive compression matrix below the final position to which chitin must return, center of gravity after spin. Neji's rotation ended. His feet touched ground. The ground answered. A narrow column of force detonated upward from directly beneath him, not entering the sphere, not breaching the defense from outside, but originating inside the logic the defense assumed safe. The blast was precise, no wider than 30 centimeters, calibrated through shock rather than fragmentation. Not lethal, not even maiming, just enough to interrupt the body at the exact point its system congratulated itself for completion. Neji was launched backward. He hit the wall hard enough to crack stone and slid down amid gasps that swept through the stadium like wind through dry leaves. For one suspended second, nobody moved. Then the crowd erupted, not in cheers at first, but in pure, disorganized disbelief. Naruto stood where he was, breathing harder now, one arm hanging slightly wrong from the tenketsu damage, face pale with the cost of what he had just done. Neji looked up from the wall. His expression was not rage, it was violation, not of body, of certainty. Naruto walked toward him slowly. The stadium quieted again, drawn by something in the posture of both boys. This was not finished. Not because the fight required more violence, but because it had always required a statement. He stopped before Neji and crouched. "Your style," Naruto said, and his voice carried clearly in the hush, "is genuinely beautiful." Neji stared. Naruto continued, calm and almost kind. Whoever designed it understood systems. They understood closure, directional denial, protected vectors, centerless defense. He glanced once toward the shattered point in the arena floor, but they made one philosophical mistake. In the Hyuga balcony, elders stiffened. They built the defense around the concept of no entry point, Naruto said, instead of around the concept of structural integrity under all conditions. Those are not the same thing. Neji's hands tightened against the stone. "You call it absolute," Naruto said softly. "But absolute is a dangerous word. It invites inspection." The boy on the wall looked as though the language itself were striking him harder than the technique had. Naruto tilted his head. "The point isn't that fate is wrong. Systems do exist. Structures do shape us before we choose anything. The point is simply that every structure, even a fated one, has a seam." He held Neji's gaze. "And the seam is always where you are most certain there isn't one." Then, to the complete astonishment of approximately everyone, he offered Neji a hand. The silence that followed was deeper than applause. Neji looked at the hand as though it were an insult, then as though it were something worse, because contempt he could metabolize. Charity, too, but this was neither. Naruto was not absolving him, mocking him, or claiming moral superiority. He was offering the hand one thinker extended to another after a proof had ended. Neji took it. Barely. Briefly. But he took it. Hayate called the match. Only then did the crowd remember how to be a crowd. Noise broke over the stadium in great crashing waves. The civilian sections loved the upset because civilians loved overturned hierarchy in controlled doses. Shinobi reacted with more caution. The Hyuga delegation sat like carved ice. Guy was openly sobbing for reasons only partly related to Lee's postponed match. Kakashi had one hand over his mask, either hiding a smile or suppressing a migraine. Up in the central balcony, Hiruzen Sarutobi was not applauding. He was reading. The file in his hands had already been opened too many times in too few weeks. Uzumaki Naruto, Psychological Evaluation. He turned one page, then another, even as the arena below roared around him. Observed traits: extreme emotional regulation, high intellectualization of conflict, atypical response to fear stimuli, reduced dependency on social reinforcement. Countervailing traits: no evidence of sadism, persistent preference for precision over spectacle, cooperative when given logically consistent constraints, shows selective respect for honesty and competence. Hiruzen closed the file without relief. Beside him, a root observer remained still enough to suggest training deeper than etiquette. Danzo had already sent word. The boy required watching. Of course he did. Naruto left the field with Sakura meeting him halfway and Sasuke falling into step beside them as though he had simply always intended to. Sakura's first look took in the damage to his arm, the paleness around his mouth, the points where Neji had interrupted flow. "You're hurt!" "Yes." "That's not a useful answer." Naruto glanced at her. "You already knew I was hurt." Sasuke cut in before she could decide whether to be offended. "You let him close your points." Naruto looked ahead. "Yes," Sasuke's jaw tightened. "That's insane." "It was necessary." "No," Sasuke said, sharper now. "It was arrogant." Naruto slowed. For a moment, Sakura expected one of them to finally say the thing both had been circling for weeks, that this tension between them was no longer mere rivalry, but a deeper discomfort with being seen too clearly by someone running on alien logic. Instead, Naruto asked, "Would you like the exact threshold at which confidence becomes overcommitment in your right hand feint?" Sasuke glared. "That," Naruto said mildly, "is arrogance." Sakura laughed before she could stop herself. Sasuke looked betrayed by both of them. Somewhere far from the stadium, in a dim room in the land of sound where candlelight made shadows look like unfinished experiments, Orochimaru stood facing a wall. He had received the reports already, not just the outcome. The words. The boy had identified the flaw in chitin under live conditions, had manipulated Orochimaru himself in the forest without trying to force conclusion, had looked directly through the rhetoric of immortality to the trembling machinery beneath it. Orochimaru was not a man often made to feel small. Naruto had not made him feel small, he had made him feel legible. That was worse. Kabuto, leaning nearby with the patient neutrality of someone wise enough not to fill silence casually, eventually said, "You're thinking about him again." Orochimaru smiled without mirth. "Wouldn't you?" Kabuto adjusted his glasses. "He is unusual." "No," Orochimaru said softly. "He is specific." And that was what disturbed him. Villages produced prodigies, wars produced monsters, bloodlines produced specialists. But specificity of worldview at that age, so clean, so internally consistent, so uninterested in external moral permission, was rarer and more dangerous than any Kekkei Genkai. "I intended the Uchiha boy to be my most interesting variable," Orochimaru murmured. Kabuto said nothing. Orochimaru's gaze went distant. "I may have been wrong." Jiraiya found Naruto later that evening on a rooftop above the village, notebook open, sunset bleeding orange across the tiles. "You always process things by writing them down?" he asked. Naruto did not look up. "Usually." Jiraiya came to stand beside him. "That stunt with the Hyuga kid, that wasn't just a fight." "No, what was it then?" Naruto's pencil moved once, stopped. A correction. Jiraiya exhaled. "You know people are going to start deciding what you mean. They already do. That doesn't bother you?" Naruto closed the notebook. "Only when they use poor language." Jiraiya laughed despite himself, then leaned on the roof edge and looked out over Konoha's evening lights. Below them, the village glowed with the soft illusion of stability all organized places cultivated at dusk. Lanterns, shop fronts, families, routines, the performance of continuity. "You know," Jiraiya said after a while, "most kids your age would be thrilled about what happened today." "Why? You beat a prodigy in front of everyone." Naruto thought about that then. Neji was more interesting before he lost. Jiraiya turned to stare at him. Naruto, noticing, added, "He may become more interesting again later." That answer, somehow, was the one that convinced Jiraiya the rumors had been underselling the problem, not because it was cruel, because it wasn't. Naruto was not reveling in triumph. He had not one to dominate. He had one to reveal a flaw in a system and then, having done so, immediately shifted his attention to what the revelation might produce next. He related to people the way some men related to volatile compounds, with attention, respect, and dangerous curiosity. Jiraiya looked down at the rooftop tiles. "What do you want, kid?" Naruto's gaze moved over the village, not the people first. The structures, bridges, walls, roads, towers, hidden lines of water and waste and movement and surveillance, human intention made visible through arrangement. "Honesty?" he said. Jiraiya was quiet. Naruto continued, voice low. "Not kindness, not peace exactly. Those are often stories people tell to disguise what they're really asking from one another. I want the world to be honest about what it is, what people are, what they're willing to build and burn for. He rested a hand on the notebook cover. A closed system that admits its conditions is beautiful. One that lies about them becomes ugly. The older man had no good reply. That frightened him more than he showed. Because beneath the unsettling phrasing, beneath the ice-clear logic and the eerie distance from ordinary adolescent hunger, there was something in Naruto's answer that was not false. And truths Jiraiya had learned over a long, compromised life were often harder to fight than monsters. Night settled. Across the village, political machinery turned. Danzo received his observers' reports and issued new instructions without changing expression. The Hyuga clan began internal conversations in rooms where paper walls did not leak as much as people hoped. Hiruzen reopened the file he had closed too often and wondered, not for the first time, what kind of future the village had placed inside itself. Kakashi wrote a mission-style summary and then tore it up because no normal report vocabulary could hold what he was trying to say. And in the dark edges beyond state light, Orochimaru kept thinking about a 12-year-old boy who had looked at him like an interesting problem instead of a nightmare. At the center of it all, Naruto remained on the roof until the stars sharpened overhead. The fight with Neji replayed in his mind not as triumph, but as structure resolved into clarity. A circle, a center, an assumption challenged, a system revealing the exact place where certainty had overreached its mathematics, beautiful, also incomplete. He opened the notebook again and wrote one line before closing it for the night. The most dangerous flaw is the one sanctified by tradition. Then he rose, tucked the notebook away, and descended back toward the village. Below him, Konoha breathed in its sleep like something alive and complicated and far less honest than it believed itself to be. Naruto found that promising. Because dishonesty, too, was only a structure. And structures, no matter how old, no matter how revered, always broke most cleanly at the seam. Chapter 4. The architecture of Kurama Naruto left the village not because Konoha trusted him. That would have been a sentimental explanation, and therefore a false one. He left because too many people had started asking incompatible questions about him at the same time. The third Hokage wanted distance between Naruto and the kinds of political hands that moved quickly when they smelled either a weapon or a scandal. Jiraiya wanted movement, because a mind like Naruto's turned inward too long inside one village might begin mistaking local hypocrisy for a complete model of the world. Danzo, though he would never have admitted it plainly, wanted the boy where he could not be easily claimed by any single faction. Kakashi wanted him alive. Sakura wanted him safe in the only way she knew how to want things, quietly, with practical worry sharpened into advice. Sasuke said very little, which by then meant a great deal. Naruto himself agreed to go because Jiraiya had described travel not as training but as observation. The world is bigger than Konoha's myths, the older man had said. Naruto had considered that for perhaps 3 seconds. Yes, he said, that is likely useful, so he left. No crowd saw him off. No orchestral goodbye unfurled over the village gate. The people who mattered to the moment were the people who knew how not to turn important transitions into theater. Sakura stood with her hands folded too tightly and gave him a satchel of medical supplies she had arranged with such fussy precision that it might as well have been a confession written in inventory form. "You won't remember to replace any of this unless someone tells you," she said. Naruto opened the satchel, glanced once inside, and nodded. "Probably true. You also need to eat regularly when you're training instead of deciding you can replace meals with tea and theory. That has only happened twice. That you admitted," he inclined his head. "Fair," Sakura hesitated. There were many things she might have said, and none of them, she suspected, would survive being spoken aloud in the shape they deserved. So she settled for the most honest available sentence. "Come back with all your organs where they belong." Naruto looked at her for a moment longer than usual. "I'll make a note," she snorted, half laughing, half on the edge of something else. Then he turned, and Jiraiya jerked a thumb toward the road, and the village became another structure behind them rather than around them. Travel suited Naruto almost immediately, not because it softened him. It did not because it made him less strange. The opposite, if anything. Freedom from Konoha's narrow narrative pressures let the full precision of his attention unfold without needing to waste itself on classroom ritual and village-level social static. But travel did something else. It gave him scale. Villages changed. Roads changed. Weather changed. Political lies changed dialect but not function. Everywhere they went, Naruto watched. Rice country towns where hunger had been turned into etiquette. Port cities where money disguised violence as commerce. Border settlements where shinobi doctrine thinned and plain survival resumed control. Small shrines abandoned after wars, no one there had started. Markets rebuilt 3 times on the same burnt foundations because human beings, for reasons Naruto was still studying, always seemed willing to return to the sites of their previous failures if enough time had passed to rename the pain. He and Jiraiya argued constantly, not loudly, not theatrically. Their disagreements were too old-souled for shouting most of the time. They took the shape of long conversations while walking, cooking, camping, studying maps, or recovering after training sessions that ended with one of them half buried in the consequences of the other's choices. Jiraiya would offer a principle. Naruto would test its load-bearing strength. The will of fire survived these exchanges less elegantly than Jiraiya might once have preferred. People die for each other. Jiraiya said one night beside a river in the grass country, while the pot over the fire struggled toward a respectable stew. That matters. Bonds matter. Villages matter because they make something bigger than one person. Naruto sat on a flat stone with a notebook balanced on one knee. They also create administrative machinery capable of normalizing child warfare and inherited trauma at scale. Jiraiya glared at him. Naruto looked up. Those are both true. That isn't wisdom. That's cynicism with good grammar. No, Naruto said quietly. Cynicism is just resentment pretending it's analysis. The older man leaned back on one hand and squinted at him through the firelight. And what are you doing? Analysis. That's convenient. Naruto's mouth moved a fraction, not quite a smile. It often is. This should have made Jiraiya dislike him. It did not. That was the problem. For all the cold architecture of Naruto's thinking, there remained moments, small, irregular, profoundly inconvenient moments, when Jiraiya saw the human shape beneath the philosophy. The boy gave his ration share to children who did not know enough to be grateful. He fixed cracked water channels in villages that would never know his name. He always answered civilians directly, even when the truth was disquieting, because lying to frightened people struck him as structurally ugly. He listened to old stories when drunk fishermen told them badly. He stood between danger and strangers with the same absence of drama he brought to everything else. Not because he believed in heroism, because suffering, if preventable, was poor design. Jiraiya could work with that. Training with him began in stages. Basic control exercises first, not because Naruto lacked control, but because his control was atypical. Too self-derived, too geometry-driven. Most shinobi were taught to shape chakra through embodied metaphors, streams, currents, heat, release. Naruto rejected nearly all of these on contact. It's not flowing, he said flatly, while Jiraiya tried for the 3rd time to explain rotational molding. It's distributing. Same difference. No, Jiraiya threw a pebble at his forehead. Naruto did not dodge. It hit and bounced away. Everything with you is a lecture. Only when the instruction is imprecise. And I'm your teacher. Yes, so I'm right, Naruto considered. That is not how knowledge works. The pebble had not improved Jiraiya's mood. Still, once the Sannin accepted that Naruto's cognition did not map cleanly onto ordinary shinobi pedagogy, progress accelerated. Advanced chakra shaping, unusual field manipulation, pressure distribution through terrain. combat geometry, multi-vector trap layering, seal interpretation, intelligence gathering, tactical improvisation. These Naruto consumed with frightening hunger. But the central issue of the journey was not skill, it was Kurama. Because there were, Jiraiya discovered two utterly different ways a Jinchuriki could be dangerous. The first was obvious: loss of control. Emotional collapse. Beast chakra swamping the host until personhood turned into collateral damage. That was the risk Konoha had prepared for, the one every instructor, report, and contingency plan assumed. The second was subtler. What if the host did not lose control? What if he established terms? Jiraiya understood this possibility in fragments at first. He had expected resistance training, seal reinforcement, perhaps the ugly work of keeping a teenager from being psychologically consumed by something ancient and furious. Instead, he found that Naruto had been visiting the seal space for years. "You've been what?" he asked, speaking with him. "With the Nine Tails." "Yes, how often?" Naruto thought. "It varies." Jiraiya felt one of his headaches begin assembling itself. "And you didn't think this deserved mentioning?" "You didn't ask." There were times when homicide seemed, if not justifiable, then at least narratively understandable. Jiraiya demanded details. Naruto provided them with the same matter-of-fact clarity he used for all dangerous phenomena. The architecture of the cage, Kurama's behavioral shifts, the quality of the chakra pressure at different internal thresholds, the fox's reactions to questions about previous hosts, the possibility that the seal itself carried emotional symbolism in addition to containment mechanics. By the end of the explanation, Jiraiya had gone very still. "You asked him about previous hosts." "Yes." And Naruto's gaze moved to the campfire. He answered. That was the moment Jiraiya realized the situation had already moved beyond anything Konoha's manuals could describe. Naruto's internal world had changed too. The first few years had presented the seal as a prison. Bars, water, distance, power separated from person by architecture and rage. But repeated visits altered the space, not by changing its fundamental structure, but by changing how it was occupied. The boy no longer approached as a jailer inspecting a monster. The fox no longer responded as a captive trying to terrify a child into retreat. Instead, the seal space became, gradually, a room still red-dark, still immense, still carrying the pressure of ancient hatred like weather frozen into stone, yet there were conversations there now. Patterns, pauses that were no longer pure threat. Questions that were answered not because trust had bloomed. Neither Naruto nor Kurama were creatures inclined toward easy trust, but because both had begun to recognize in the other something rarer than comfort: consistency. The first time Kurama told him about the other vessels, the fox did not mean to. Naruto had entered the seal space after a day of failed Rasengan progress, annoyed less by the technique's difficulty than by its pedagogical mythology. Jiraiya kept describing it as instinct harnessed into perfect spinning force. Naruto wanted to know its internal logic, not its emotional branding. He sat in the shallow water before the gate, chin on one hand. "You seem irritated," Kurama observed. "The Rasengan is aesthetically inelegant in its current teaching form." Kurama stared. Naruto looked up. "It is. Tremendous force generation, but the explanatory framework is almost offensively vague. Humans treat mysterious things as profound when often they are merely under-described." The fox's tails shifted in the dark behind him. "And this upsets you." "It wastes time." A rumbling sound passed through the chamber. It took Naruto a second to realize it was laughter. "You truly are the strangest container I've had," Kurama said. Naruto's attention sharpened at once. "You've had several." Silence. Kurama's eyes narrowed, annoyed at himself. Naruto leaned forward. "How many?" "That is none of your concern." "It became my concern when one of them built the seal around you and left the architecture inside me." Kurama's lip curled. "Clever, usually." The fox said nothing. Naruto, after a measured pause, asked the question differently. "Did they all hate you?" The red dark space went quiet enough for old water to matter. When Kurama finally spoke, the answer came stripped of performance. No, Naruto waited. That more than any demand made the fox continue, not all at once, not with names first, with feelings, with fragments. A woman whose chakra tasted like iron will and sorrow braided tightly together. Another presence older than her, full of purpose and chains. A sequence of human hands always touching the seal, as if touching the container made the contained thing simpler. Fear, yes. Resentment, yes. But also fatigue. Loneliness. Duty treated as virtue because calling it imprisonment would have made everyone too honest too quickly. Naruto listened. Did not interrupt. Did not pity. That mattered. The world had pitied Kurama in mythic language and hated him in political language and used him in military language. Very few had ever listened to him in literal language. When the fox finished, Naruto said quietly, "That must have been boring." Kurama stared, then barked a sharp, involuntary laugh that showed too many teeth. "Boring," he repeated. "Yes," Naruto said. "Humans repeating the same moral failures with new vocabulary over centuries is often presented as tragedy. But structurally, it's mostly repetition." The fox lowered his head until his eyes were closer to the bars. "You are an infuriating child." Naruto inclined his head. "So I've been told." Their partnership formed there, not from sentiment, not from taming, not from friendship in any conventional human sense. It formed because Kurama, ancient and terrible and lonelier than he would ever admit aloud, had finally encountered a human who did not ask him to become smaller in order to become acceptable. Naruto did not want the fox softened. He wanted him understood. And Kurama, in turn, recognized that beneath the boy's unnerving philosophical clarity there lived no hypocrisy. Dangerous intent, yes, cold fascination often, but not hypocrisy. To Kurama, that was almost enough to qualify as kinship. Jiraiya noticed the effects in training long before Naruto named them. When the boy reached for the fox's chakra, there was no feral spill, no uncontrolled lash of demonic pressure, no half-formed transformation of claw and hatred. Instead, crimson light began writing itself into the air. Lines first, then arcs, then concentric circles suspended around Naruto's body like the activation sequence of some impossible machine. The chakra did not shroud him so much as arrange itself through him and around him, as if beast power had agreed, temporarily, conditionally, to be translated through a human mind that required all force to pass through structure before it could become action. Jiraiya saw it for the first time during a canyon exercise in the Fire Country. He had pushed Naruto hard that day on purpose. Exhaustion, unstable footing, multiple shadow clone vectors, disrupted breathing patterns, forced target prioritization. By the end of the sequence, Naruto's own reserves were low enough that the old red pressure should have begun to leak through in ugly ways. Instead, the air around him hummed. Crimson geometric arrays unfolded in three-dimensional layers around his shoulders and spine, precise as seal work, but alive. Every line held, every node pulsed. The killing intent was there. Jiraiya felt that much instantly, ancient and inhuman and absolute, but it had been organized, disciplined. Not reduced, but rendered legible through mathematics. Naruto opened his eyes. The pupils were still his. That worried Jiraiya more than any slitted transformation might have. "What?" the Sannin said slowly. "Am I looking at?" Naruto glanced at the arrays rotating slowly in the air around him as if checking another person's work. "A catalyst framework." "That is not a normal sentence." "It is an accurate one." Jiraiya pinched the bridge of his nose. "Explain!" Naruto did. Kurama's chakra, he had concluded, was most often treated either as a blunt power source or as a corruptive risk to be suppressed. Both approaches were simplistic. The chakra was not just energy. It was volatile material, functionally distinct from ordinary reserves in density, hostility, and reactive potential. If one attempted to wield it directly, it either overwhelmed the user or reduced all technique to brute escalation. If, however, One used it as a transmutation catalyst rather than primary fuel, introducing it into pre-structured frameworks that could shape detonation, conversion, and pressure expression. Its instability became not a flaw, but the very property from which precision could be extracted. Jiraiya stared at him. You built a theory around demon chakra. Naruto thought about that. Yes, you're 17. I am currently 15. That did not help. The techniques that followed were unlike anything Jiraiya had planned to teach. Naruto developed them slowly, with the obsessive rigor of someone designing not merely attacks but principles. A compression lattice that could turn incoming force against itself through Kurama enhanced rebound geometry. A shaped charge release that detonated only at the precise moment an opponent committed weight past recovery. A terrain-wide matrix seeded through the ground with invisible chakra logic, dormant until triggered by hostile intent moving through predefined vectors. Not every experiment succeeded. One exploded a cliff face 30 seconds too early and nearly dropped Jiraiya into a ravine. Another destabilized a river crossing so thoroughly they had to spend half a day rebuilding it for civilians afterward. You cannot, Jiraiya said while ankle-deep in muddy reconstruction. Keep discovering new categories of alarming. Naruto lifted a support beam into place. Evidence suggests otherwise. They took missions where useful and avoided them where not. Jiraiya's network brought them rumors of Akatsuki movements, missing nin routes, political fractures, and the slow external rearrangement of the world as forces larger than any one village began testing the edges of one another's patience. Naruto listened to all of it and remembered more than Jiraiya liked. He also wrote to Sakura, not often, not sentimentally, but regularly enough that she began recognizing the pattern. Reports disguised as travel commentary, odd observations about foreign medical practices, once a 3-page description of a border town water system that ended with the line, "The local administrative structure would likely interest you more than the architecture," which is saying something about their incompetence. She wrote back in sharper, shorter letters that pretended annoyance and contained care in every margin. He did not write to Sasuke. He thought about doing so twice and decided against it both times because the letter he would have sent. Your entire personality remains a temporary bridge built over one unresolved collapse, was unlikely to improve the situation. Years passed that way, not peacefully exactly. Peace implies a lack of pressure. Naruto's life remained full of pressure. Training, missions, observation, internal negotiation. The endless friction between Jiraiya's stubborn belief in human salvageability and Naruto's equally stubborn demand that human beings first stop lying about themselves before asking to be salvaged. But the years were productive. He grew height first, then reach, then voice settling into a lower register that made some of his calmest statements hit harder than before. His hair remained impossible. His face sharpened. The village's old image of him, loud and orange and attention-hungry, became increasingly inaccurate the longer he was away from those who still clung to it. Even his movement changed. Less wasted bounce, more vector. He had always been physically quick. Now he became deliberate in a way that made speed seem almost incidental to intent. By the time he was 17, the world around him had begun noticing. The Akatsuki encounter happened in river country under a sky the color of old steel. Jiraiya had picked up signs first: dead scouts, altered routes, a missing cell from one of his information chains. Naruto noticed the rest: water disturbed against current near the banks, chakra residue too clean for locals, crows leaving a line of trees all at once. Company, he said. Jiraiya was already moving. They reached a clearing near the river's bend and found them waiting without waiting, because men like Itachi Uchiha and Kasama Hoshigaki did not need theatrics to create pressure. Their presence did the work. Kasama grinned openly, shark-like and delighted in advance. Same Hodder rested against one shoulder, wrapped and alive in the wrong way. Itachi stood beside him with the deep, exhausted stillness of someone wearing duty as a skin too long. Jiraiya stepped forward. Naruto did not. He studied the sword first. Interesting, he thought. Same Hada's chakra-eating function altered the geometry of the entire engagement. Most shinobi facing such a weapon made one of two mistakes. They either withheld chakra so aggressively they crippled their own offense, or they challenged consumption with greater output and got stripped for it. Both assumed the sword's appetite was the stable fact around which battle must turn. Naruto, looking at it, saw a mouth. Mouths could be baited. Kasama's grin widened when he noticed the attention. "You're the kid!" "Yes," Naruto said. "You've got strange eyes for someone not using a dojutsu." "That may be projection." Jiraiya made a small warning sound. Itachi's gaze moved over Naruto and stayed there a fraction longer than politeness required. Not surprise, evaluation. Kasama laughed. "I like him." "That is not mutual," Naruto replied pleasantly. The clash began fast. Jiraiya moved for Itachi because some contests were not children's work regardless of what children could do. Space bent around summons, mud, water, and speed. The clearing became multiple battlefields at once. Naruto stepped toward Kasama instead. Kasama looked delighted by that. "Brave!" "No," Naruto said. "Curious." The first swing of Same Hada carved through the air with enough force to discourage foolishness. Naruto didn't meet it. He let it pass, measuring speed, angle, reach. The sword's chakra signature was grotesque up close, parasitic, layered, eager. Not malevolent in a human sense. Hungered. A system of consumption given edge and loyalty. Kasama came again with brutal enthusiasm, every motion built on overwhelming force. Naruto gave ground across wet earth and riverstone, retreating in tight patterns that looked reactive and were not. Each step placed something. Each dodge marked space. Each near-miss fed Kasama a narrative, younger opponent, cautious, avoiding direct challenge. Then Naruto let the sword bite, not flesh, chakra. A pulse of his own reserve streamed off his forearm as Same Hada scraped past, and the weapon shuddered with greedy pleasure as it devoured the offered energy. Kasama's eyes lit. "There it is!" Naruto almost smiled, because what he had fed the sword was not ordinary chakra. It was structured, layered with pre-shaped internal logic, tiny unstable geometries held in apparent coherence until exposed to an external consumption matrix. Same Hada swallowed it eagerly and swallowed a shaped charge. Nothing exploded outward. That would have been vulgar. Instead, the sword convulsed. Its scales rippled in abrupt disorder. The internal rhythm by which it processed stolen chakra stuttered as Naruto's carefully arranged catalyst pattern unfolded inside its mechanism like poison written as mathematics. Same Hada spat his chakra back out in a violent red-blue burst and shrieked. Kasama's grin vanished. Naruto spoke over the sound. "If a thing eats indiscriminately, the logical counter is not starvation. It's diet." He moved. Kasama recovered with astonishing speed, to his credit. Water surged up around him as he shifted to larger scale control, trying to overwhelm terrain and opponent together. But that was the second trap. During the entire opening exchange, Naruto had been seeding the field, the clearing's ground activated. Crimson arrays flashed through mud, roots, and broken stone. Not visible enough to blind, but enough to make the whole environment feel, for one wrong instant, as though it had become a machine and everyone still standing in it had been accepted as input rather than operator. Pressure reactive nodes triggered under Kasama's landing points. The riverbank compacted and burst where he pushed hardest. Water that should have obeyed his large-scale control hit hidden destabilization layers and collapsed in on itself, turning broad jutsu into fragmented currents that no longer supported the shapes he intended. Kasama laughed then. Not because things were going well. Because they weren't, and the failure was interesting. "Oh, this is good," he said, dodging an upward burst of earth that would have shattered a leg if taken wrong. "You're not strong in the normal, boring way." Naruto's crimson arrays unfolded fully around him then. The cloak, if it could be called that, did not cover him like skin. It wrote itself in the air around him, circles rotating behind his shoulders, angular crimson lines intersecting at wrists and spine, symbols forming and dissolving as if the chakra itself were a living theorem too large to remain static. The pressure in the clearing changed. Not wild. Worse. Deliberate, as though the battle had ceased to be an exchange and become a calculation already nearing conclusion. Kasama felt it, and his grin widened again despite the danger. You really would have made a good Akatsuki. I know, Naruto said. Then he was inside Kasama's guard. Not faster in a simple sense. More precise. Samehada swung. Naruto redirected its path by striking the wrapped hilt's weakest control point with a burst of catalyst chakra that made the weapon recoil from his own matrix contamination. Kasama compensated with brute force and nearly caught Naruto with the backswing, but the ground under his rear foot destabilized at exactly the wrong instant, and his center of gravity shifted. Naruto touched the river. Chakra surged, not explosion. Compression. The water at Kasama's flank folded inward and struck sideways in a hyper-condensed jet, less like a wave than a hydraulic verdict. Kasama blocked with the sword and was driven back through two shattered trees, boots trenching furrows in the mud. Samehada whined. Naruto advanced one step, then stopped. The field around Kasama lit with dormant nodes he had not even realized existed until that moment. 10, 12, 15 possible triggers embedded in every direction of retreat. Not all real. Enough real. Kasama looked around and began laughing harder. Wonderful, he said. You built the room while we were talking. Yes. Samehada twitched unhappily in his grip. Kasama tilted his head. You going to finish it? Naruto looked at the sword, then at Kasama, then at the lines of choice left available in the field. No, he said. Not today. Something in that answer delighted Kasama more than any threat could have. From the other side of the clearing, Jiraiya and Itachi had reached the same conclusion by different routes. Escalation here would cost more than it was worth. Jiraiya's summons and barrier work had prevented the Uchiha from ever reaching clean genjutsu tempo. Itachi, as ever, fought like a man carrying entire invisible wars behind his eyes. Neither had broken the other. Both had learned. Kasama stepped back slowly, still grinning. Naruto let the arrays remain for one breath longer, then allowed them to collapse into his skin like embers re-entering a furnace. You should leave, he said. Kasama slung Samehada more carefully now. Or what? Naruto's gaze dropped to the sword, then returned to Kasama's face. Or I decide to see what it looks like from the inside. Kasama barked another laugh and did exactly what smart predators did when they found themselves in an ecosystem more complicated than advertised. He withdrew. Itachi gave Naruto one unreadable look before turning with him. In that gaze there was no contempt, no easy category, only a private calculus adjusting itself under new information. Then they were gone. The clearing remained wrecked in mathematically offensive ways. Jiraiya stared at Naruto for several long seconds after the chakra pressure faded. What? He said finally, was that? Naruto looked around at the broken trees. Field adaptation. Jiraiya pointed at the ruined riverbank. You poisoned a legendary sword with geometry. Yes, you said that like it was a normal sentence. It is structurally normal. It is not. Naruto glanced at him. You are upset. I am having a multifaceted spiritual experience. They left the clearing quickly, as wise men and alarming teenagers often did after making too much noise near enemies who preferred not to be embarrassed twice. That night, they made camp farther upriver in a hollow between black pines. Jiraiya layered enough seals around the perimeter to satisfy his paranoia, which meant they were probably only 90% doomed if discovered again. Naruto sat by the fire cleaning mud from one sleeve. For a long time neither of them spoke. The silence between them had changed over the years. At first it had been teacher-student silence, full of unsaid corrections and resisted authority. Later it had become something almost companionable, though neither would have used that word. Now it was the silence of two people who had seen enough of one another's interior, whether to know that forcing speech too early often reduced it. Eventually, Jiraiya asked, very quietly, "What do you actually want?" Naruto looked up. "Not from training," Jiraiya said. "Not from the next fight. From life. When all this is done, Akatsuki, village politics, whatever disaster history's sharpening in the dark. What do you want the world to look like?" The fire cracked between them. Naruto did not answer immediately. This was unusual enough that Jiraiya did not interrupt. At length Naruto said, "Honest." The older man watched him through the flames. "I want the world to stop narrating itself as kinder than it is," Naruto said. "No more will of fire used to beautify sacrifice after the sacrifice has already been decided. No more destiny rhetoric for bloodlines. No more institutions pretending their violence is morally cleaner because they filed it properly. No more people hiding what they are underneath ceremonial language." He rested one forearm across a raised knee. "The thing about an explosion is that it never lies. It is exactly what it is every time. Pressure, release, transformation, cost, nothing disguised, nothing decorative." Jiraiya's expression did not change, but something in his shoulders did. Naruto looked into the fire. "I think I want to live in a world that has that quality." The words hung there. Jiraiya had spent years telling himself the boy could still be bent gently toward more ordinary forms of hope. That some buried canon of human softness would, under enough travel and training and witness, emerge victorious over the colder architecture Kimblee's soul had brought into him. Now, listening, he understood something more complicated. Naruto was not missing humanity. He simply defined its beauty differently, and that difference might yet save the world or break it in a shape no one living had vocabulary for. The fire burned lower. Inside the seal space, far beneath speech and sleep, Kurama listened too. The fox said nothing. But when Naruto drifted into exhausted rest an hour later, the red dark chamber of his inner world felt less like a prison than it had the first night he found it. Not freer, just less lonely. At dawn, they packed camp and resumed the road. Behind them lay a ruined clearing, a wounded sword, and two Akatsuki members carrying back reports that would alter timelines. Ahead lay villages, war, political fracture, old wounds walking in human form, and a future that was beginning to gather around Naruto Uzumaki, not as destiny, but as consequence. He walked beside Jiraiya with the same calm stride he used crossing market streets or battlefields, a satchel over one shoulder, notebook tucked away, eyes on the road and the systems hidden beneath it. The world, he had discovered, was larger than Konoha's myths. This did not make it kinder. It made it more exact. Naruto found that preferable, because exact things could be measured, measured things could be understood, and understood things, however ancient, however powerful, however sacred their architecture, could eventually be made to reveal the seam. Chapter 5. The criminal philosopher Naruto returned to Konoha taller, quieter, and far more difficult to misread if one had ever understood him in the first place. This created a problem. The village had spent years carrying an old image of him in its collective mind. The loud orphan in orange, all appetite and defiance, a nuisance that could be categorized, mocked, pitied, or cautiously tolerated according to the needs of the observer. That image had survived partly because it was convenient. Villages, like all large systems, preferred their dangerous variables simplified into symbols they had already budgeted for. The man who walked back through the gate beside Jiraiya did not fit any available category. He still wore bright color, though less carelessly. His body had lengthened into adult lines, lean and controlled, without losing the explosive physicality that had always defined him in motion. His face had sharpened. His smile, when it appeared, no longer asked anything of the world. The old hyperactivity had not vanished so much as been condensed into purpose. Even his silence felt different now, less like muteness, more like reserve under pressure, and then there was the way people reacted to him. Some recognized him and felt delayed guilt for things done or left undone in his childhood. Others felt unease without knowing why. Shinobi sensed it more clearly than civilians. Pressure. Attention. The sense that Naruto was no longer merely present in a room but reading it. Kakashi met him at the gate, visible eye curving in a smile that only partly concealed his relief. "You got taller," he said. "Yes, you also got stranger," Naruto considered. "That is likely true," Jiraiya snorted. "Likely, he says?" Kakashi's gaze moved over the subtle changes no report could fully capture. The more deliberate posture, the sharpened gaze, the strange stillness in the shoulders of someone who had learned to carry immense force without leaking it. "Welcome home," Kakashi said. Naruto looked past him, over the roofs and alleys and power lines of the village, sunlight lying soft across architecture that had once seemed whole enough simply by existing. Then he looked back. "Thank you," he said. It was an honest answer that mattered more than warmth. Tsunade received him in the Hokage's office with a bottle on the windowsill, a mountain of paperwork on the desk, and the expression of a woman who had spent years being the only adult in a room full of ideologies. She did not waste time on sentiment. "You've caused a great deal of anxiety," she said. Naruto sat opposite her without slouching. "Indirectly, still counts." Shizune, standing off to one side with the posture of a person perpetually one administrative collapse away from prayer, said nothing. Tsunade's gaze remained on Naruto. He met it without challenge. This was one of the reasons she found him so exhausting. He did not posture for authority, did not submit to it theatrically, did not test it in juvenile ways. He simply evaluated it. Every conversation with him felt, to some degree, like being measured for structural integrity. "You've grown useful," Tsunade said at last. Naruto inclined his head. "That was the intention. And dangerous. That too." Most people would have denied that second point out of instinct or self-preservation. Tsunade appreciated the honesty even as it complicated everything. The relationship between them settled almost immediately into its permanent shape. Respect braced against distrust. Tsunade was too pragmatic to pretend Naruto was anything other than brilliant, and too experienced with brilliant men to find that comforting. Naruto, in turn, respected Tsunade because she rarely hid institutional ugliness behind ceremonial language. She knew Konoha was not innocent. She loved it anyway. Naruto did not share the second impulse, but he trusted the first. "Your loyalty," Tsunade said, fingers steepled under her chin, "is not the loyalty of a soldier." "No. Do you want to elaborate before I make up something worse?" Naruto's eyes shifted briefly toward the village beyond the window. "Konoha is interesting," he said. "It contains people and systems worth preserving and people and systems worth dismantling. While the first remain meaningfully possible, I will act in the village's interest." Shizune closed her eyes. Tsunade stared at him. "That is among the least reassuring formulations I have ever heard. It is the most accurate one." "Yes," Tsunade muttered, "that's the problem." Sakura saw him next, and nearly forgot the prepared version of herself she had meant to wear for the meeting. For years, she had built small conversational defenses against Naruto. Irritation as cover, brisk practicality in place of whatever softer and more dangerous things honesty threatened to reveal. Those defenses had worked because he had always accepted them as part of her architecture without trying to remove them. Now he stood in the hospital corridor in travel-worn clothes with the strange composure of someone who had gone out into the world and found his internal vocabulary confirmed by it rather than softened. She looked at him, then at the satchel over his shoulder, then at the scar near his wrist she did not remember. "You came back with all your organs where they belong," she said. Naruto nodded. "So far." Something in her face changed, not dramatic, just a tiny release of pressure she would have denied under oath. She stepped forward, inspected him as if he were one of her patients pretending to be fine, and clicked her tongue when she noticed the accumulated signs of travel and battle. "You look terrible." "That is also possible." She laughed despite herself. A few hours later, when they spoke alone on the hospital roof while the evening settled over the village, she asked the question she had been carrying since his return. "Are you happy to be back?" Naruto thought about it seriously. "Yes," he said. Sakura turned, surprised by how quickly the answer came. He looked out across the rooftops. Konoha remains hypocritical in several structurally important ways, he said. But it is still, he paused, as if selecting a word from a drawer he did not open often. Mine, in part. Sakura watched him in profile. She did not smile, but she stood a little closer. Sasuke's absence lay over the village like a fracture everyone had learned to route around without forgetting it was there. In canon, the story of Sasuke's departure belonged emotionally to Naruto's pursuit. Here, that relationship had always been stranger. Naruto did not dream of bringing Sasuke home because bonds demanded rescue. He did not think of friendship as possession or redemption as retrieval. What drew him towards Sasuke was not simple affection, though some difficult, angular form of that had grown in the cracks between observation and conflict. It was that Sasuke represented a problem of trajectory, a life built around injury, genius, pride, and selective honesty. A person with enough clarity to become extraordinary and enough unresolved grief to build the extraordinary badly. Naruto found that compelling. Tsunade, who had learned not to ask him leading moral questions, simply gave him the facts. Orochimaru's organization had shifted. Intelligence suggested fractures. Sasuke had grown stronger. Rumors placed him increasingly at the center of his own orbit rather than merely inside Orochimaru's. Akatsuki activity had increased. Danzo had become more active in quiet places where quiet men cultivated power through other people's losses. "Do you intend to pursue Sasuke?" Tsunade asked. Naruto considered. "Yes," he said. Tsunade leaned back. "To bring him back." "No." That answer surprised her less than it should have. "To do what then?" "To understand what he believes he is becoming." Tsunade rubbed one temple. "And if what he's becoming is a disaster," Naruto's voice remained calm, "then understanding it will still be useful." The search did not begin immediately. The world had grown too crowded with moving disasters for old loyalties to be pursued in the clean, straight lines youth preferred. Naruto took missions, assisted on Akatsuki intelligence. Cross-referenced reports Jiraiya had gathered over years with newer village data. Observed how the political geometry of Konoha shifted around Tsunade's authority and Danzo's shadow. Built, without announcing it, an internal map of every fracture line likely to matter in the next war. Sai passed through this period like a weapon, learning the inconvenience of personhood. Yamato, patient enough to babysit both Naruto and institutions, developed an exhausted respect for the way Naruto could make every meeting feel like a test of epistemology. Kakashi watched the village attempt to classify its returning prodigy and privately concluded classification had long since ceased to be an option. Then Itachi died. The news arrived not as ceremony but as information. Quiet, precise, devastating in the ways only old blood debts ever were. Sasuke had fought him. Sasuke had survived. Orochimaru was gone from the equation in one form or another. And then, almost immediately after, the deeper truth began surfacing through channels too broken to contain it properly. The Uchiha massacre had not been a simple crime, it had been policy. Danzo's name began appearing in whispers sharp enough to draw blood. Sasuke, now carrying both the wound he had always known and the larger machinery behind it, changed direction. He was not merely a missing nin anymore. He had become a rogue variable. Naruto found him in the ruins of a village at the edge of Sound Country after 3 weeks of tracking patterns most hunter nin would have mistaken for absence. Sasuke had not erased his trail. He had made it discontinuous. There was a difference. He had learned from Orochimaru, from Akatsuki, from grief, from power. His movements no longer expressed need. They expressed choice. The village where they met had already burned recently enough for the air to retain the memory of it. Charred beams jutted from collapsed homes. Wind moved ash through the streets in gray veils. Somewhere deeper in the wreckage, something still smoldered under stone. Sasuke stood in the center of it as though he had grown naturally from the destruction. He looked older too, not just in face, in weight. The body carried power now with that dangerous ease born from having tested it in earnest. Darkness had not made him messy, it had made him cleaner. That was part of the problem. He turned when Naruto approached. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Sasuke said, "You came to bring me back." Naruto stopped several meters away, hands at his sides. "No," he said. "I came because I wanted to understand what you thought you were doing." That landed harder than accusation would have. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. "You always talk like that, usually." Wind pushed ash between them. The ruined village around them crackled softly in places where buried embers still negotiated with oxygen. Naruto took in the scene, the remnants of one of Orochimaru's laboratories or satellites by the look of the surviving structures. Human experimentation had a recognizable aesthetic once one learned to see it. Bad ventilation, improvised containment, architecture built by people more interested in access than dignity. "You killed him," Naruto said. "Yes." "How did it feel?" Sasuke seemed briefly more prepared for rage than for the question's tone. "Necessary." Naruto nodded once. "That is often not the same thing." Sasuke's mouth tightened. "You didn't come here for philosophy." "I came here because your current trajectory is intellectually disappointing." That got through. Sasuke's chakra flared, sudden and hard enough to lift ash from the stones around his feet. "Say that again." Naruto stepped forward one pace into the pressure rather than away from it. "You built your entire architecture on hatred," he said, "which is coherent. Hatred is one of the few honest emotions human beings rarely bother dressing in prettier language, but you are no longer honoring it." His gaze remained steady. "You're using it as scaffolding to avoid asking what you actually want the world to look like when the people who hurt you are dead." Sasuke went very still. The Sharingan bled into existence. Naruto kept talking. "Orochimaru wanted to outlive death because he feared it. Nagato, from what I know, wants to universalize pain because it wounded him first. Danzo wants control because he mistakes paranoia for stewardship." He tilted his head slightly. "And you say you want justice for your clan, revenge for Itachi, destruction for Konoha, but none of those are terminal states, they're only vectors." Sasuke's voice, when it came, was low and dangerous. "You know nothing about my brother." "No," Naruto said. "But I know enough about structures built on injury to recognize when the person inside them has mistaken motion for direction." That was when Sasuke attacked. The first exchange cracked the street apart. He came in not with the brittle anger of their youth, but with sharpened adult violence. Every movement honed by purpose and darkness mutually reinforcing one another. Chidori shrieked blue-white in his hand. Naruto met it not with direct force, but with angled redirection, collapsing the ground under Sasuke's lead step just enough to tilt the attack off-center. Sasuke corrected instantly, pivoted, and drove a kick toward Naruto's ribs that should have landed. It did land. Naruto absorbed it, rolled with it, and sent a compression burst through the broken wall behind himself, using the rebound force to launch sideways into a better line. Sasuke's eyes tracked everything. Good, Naruto thought. He's not lost yet. The fight spread through the village ruins like argument, taking physical form. Fire met collapsing geometry. Chidori tore through stone only for the debris to become part of Naruto's next field. Sasuke's genjutsu slid across the edge of the encounter and found less purchase than expected because Naruto's mind, for all its vulnerabilities, had never been arranged like other people's. It was too compartmentalized, too self-observing, too practiced at watching its own responses happen. They bled each other with precision rather than spectacle. At one point, Sasuke drove Naruto through the remains of a shrine and pinned him there with enough killing intent to stun ordinary men. "You still think this is theory?" Sasuke asked. Blood touched the corner of Naruto's mouth. He looked at Sasuke's face from inches away and saw, beneath the fury, the child still asking why the world had chosen his house to burn. "No," Naruto said quietly. "I think it is grief pretending it has become a plan." Something passed through Sasuke's eyes then, rage sharpened by recognition. He drove the Chidori down. Naruto detonated the shrine floor under both of them. The blast hurled them apart in opposite directions, tearing the last standing wall into a cloud of splinters and firelit dust. When the air cleared, both men were on their feet again, breathing hard, clothes torn, the village around them reduced to wider ruin for having tried to contain the conversation. The fight could have continued. It should have, by ordinary logic. Instead, both stopped, not from exhaustion, from understanding that the next phase would no longer produce new information. Only more damage. Naruto lowered his hand first. Sasuke did not relax, but he did not strike. Wind moved through the crater between them. "When you figure out," Naruto said, "what you want from the world rather than just what you want to destroy, come find me." Sasuke stared at him. Naruto's voice remained level, almost gentle in a way that from him felt more intimate than comfort. "The conversation will be more interesting." Then he turned and left the ruined village without looking back. Sasuke did not stop him. That mattered. Pain's invasion began while Naruto was 3 hours away from Konoha, completing a mission so ordinary in its paperwork that it insulted the scale of what history had apparently scheduled for the same day. The message hawk found him at noon. By 1 o'clock, the second confirmation arrived. By 2, he no longer needed either. The horizon itself had changed. Anyone with proper sensory training could have felt it eventually. A vast disturbance in the chakra weather, pressure waves layered beneath distance. The signature of something so immense that the air seemed to have been forced to remember it. Jiraiya was already dead by then, though Naruto did not know it in language yet. He knew it elsewhere. The road back to Konoha became a blur of impossible speed. Body and chakra pushed to thresholds that made prudence an embarrassing suggestion. He arrived at the outer ridge just as evening light began to flatten into the long gold of disaster, and found the village gone. Not entirely, of course. Total annihilation was almost never so neat, but the Konoha he had left existed now only as geometry of absence, crater, rubble. Dust hanging low in the air like the village soul had been pulverized and had not yet decided where to settle. Shinra Tensei, some part of his mind observed immediately. A repulsive force event on monstrous scale. Radial distribution indicates not simple brute output, but precise centralization. The pattern is mathematically elegant, and then the rest of him saw the ramen stand, or what remained of it, the frame half collapsed. The counter opened to the sky. Familiar wood shattered into meaningless angles. Something happened inside Naruto then that did not fit cleanly into any of his existing philosophy. The Kimblee-born architecture in him recognized, with cold, involuntary clarity, that this was beautiful work in one sense. Pain had dismantled a village through a technique so singularly coherent that the destruction itself carried intention like a signature. There was terrible elegance in that. And below it, below theory, below admiration, below every clean internal sentence he had ever used to protect himself from simpler kinds of hurt. Something older and smaller and far more human looked at the place where he had once sat with ramen steaming up into his face after graduation, and became angry, not abstractly, not ideologically. Home had been hit. He did not have language for that. Not one he trusted, so he moved. Sage mode came not as revelation, but as inevitability. Jiraiya had taught him the principles. Naruto had studied them, challenged them, translated their mysticism into models he could use without insulting their complexity. He had understood nature energy as another lattice, another substrate, another immense system into which the self could be inserted only if its geometry became right enough to survive the contact. He had reached for it before in controlled settings. Now he reached with fury. Natural energy entered his body in clean, devastating volumes, and instead of washing his mind into stillness, it found there the same ruthless structural intelligence it always had, and sharpened it. His perception widened. Chakra networks glowed through rubble and distance. The 6 paths of pain ceased to appear as individual monsters and became what they actually were: linked units in a distributed system. Good, Naruto thought. Systems can be taken apart. The first path died because it mistook absorbability for invulnerability. The Predator path lunged to drain a Rasengan equivalent Naruto had no intention of throwing honestly. He fed it a sage-structured catalyst, burst braided with Kurama reactive instability. The body absorbed, convulsed, and collapsed as the incompatible energies tore its internal channel logic into unusable confusion. The Asura path, built for overwhelming projectile violence, found itself trapped in a narrowing field of collapsed buildings Naruto turned into moving cover, and then into pressure traps. Its mechanical limbs were torn off not by raw force, but by localized detonations at the joint assumptions. The human path tried proximity. Naruto let it. Close-range chakra contact required confidence in the body's integrity under all conditions. Neji had already taught the story, and pain, through this path, had arrived late to the same lesson. Naruto rewrote the ground beneath both of them, took the soul-rip grip on one shoulder, and drove a natural energy compression spike through the body from inside its balance point. It came apart like an argument whose central premise had been removed. One by one he isolated them, not with speeches, with sequence. Sakura, elsewhere among the ruins, felt him before she saw him, felt the pressure shift through the battlefield as if the world itself had become suddenly more exact. She had spent the invasion holding triage together with blood on her hands and rubble in her lungs, being what she always was when structures failed. Useful. When Naruto finally crossed her field of vision atop broken stone, cloaked not in beast rage but in terrible converging lines of crimson and sage marked stillness, she did not feel rescue. She felt the battlefield make room for a stronger idea. The Diva path remained for last because it was the center in the visible sense, even if not the true one. Their confrontation cut through the crater at the village's heart. Pain spoke, of course. Men like him always did. About pain, cycles, necessary lessons, the world educated through suffering. Naruto listened the way he had once listened to Orochimaru, carefully enough to locate the wound beneath the system. The fight between them tore stone into weather. Shinra Tensei met counters built not on overpowering repulsion, but on timing its interval, mapping its recovery, forcing it to reveal rhythm. Each divine push carried enormous force. Each carried, too, the arrogance of a technique too accustomed to being treated as godhood rather than mechanism. Naruto smiled once, blood in his mouth and dust on his skin. Every god, he thought, is only a system with unusually good public relations. When he finally reached Nagato, when Conan's paper opened the path, and the hidden chamber exhaled its stale air, and the real body appeared, gaunt and dying and threaded into machinery like a saint redesigned by engineers. Naruto did not draw a kunai. He looked. Nagato looked back, hollow-eyed and immense in the ruins of himself. This, Naruto thought, is the center wound. You built your whole philosophy around a fracture, he said quietly. Nagato's gaze sharpened. You know nothing of my pain. No, Naruto said, but I know architecture. Conan moved slightly beside the apparatus, paper whispering with threat. Nagato raised a hand a fraction. Not yet, Naruto stepped closer. Your pain was real, he said. Your dead were real. The lesson the world taught you was real. But the system you built on top of that wound, this idea that universalized suffering can produce peace through symmetry, that part is fraudulent. Nagato's face twisted faintly. Fraudulent? Yes. Naruto's tone did not rise. You took the most honest thing that ever happened to you and used it to justify a lie. Not that pain matters. It does. Not that the world is cruel. It is. The lie is that making everyone suffer your shape of suffering will reveal truth to them. The chamber had gone silent except for machine breath and Nagato's own. Naruto's eyes did not leave his. You and Orochimaru built from opposite fears and ended in the same place, he said. One afraid of death, one unable to let grief end, both mistaking obsession for clarity. For the first time since this conversation began, Nagato seemed less like a prophet than a dying man. And what would you build? He asked. Naruto looked at him for a long moment. Then, with the exhausted honesty of someone too angry to perform philosophy cleanly, he answered, "I don't know yet." That was the sentence that changed everything. Not because it was hopeful, because it was true. Nagato, who had spent years weaponizing certainty because uncertainty had once cost him everything, stared at the young man before him and saw something he had not expected. A mind sharp enough to dissect him without mercy and still unwilling to lie about its own incompletion. No absolution. No sermon. No heroic inheritance of Jiraiya's dream reframed into softer words, just recognition. You were wounded. You built badly from it. I can see exactly how. I will not pretend otherwise. Nagato closed his eyes. When he spoke again, the voice had lost its prophecy and become human. Perhaps, he said, that is more honest. Rin Rebirth took what remained of him. Konoha's dead returned not in triumph but in exhausted miracle, bodies dragged back across the threshold by a man who had finally understood that being seen clearly was, in the end, worth answering clearly. When Naruto stepped out into the rebuilt evening streets later, dust settling, medics shouting, villagers staggering through restoration with the dazed faces of people returned abruptly to a life they had already begun mourning, his hands were shaking. Not from chakra loss, from aftershock. Sakura found him near the remains of where the ramen stand had stood, and now stood again in the incomplete way things do after resurrection. Repaired in body, not yet in meaning. She came up beside him and did not ask whether he was all right. She knew better. After a while, she said, "You're bleeding." "Yes, you always answer like that. It tends to be accurate." She looked at his hands. "They're shaking." Naruto followed her gaze as if he hadn't noticed. "Yes," he said again. Neither spoke for a while. Then Sakura asked, very softly, "What happened in there?" Naruto watched the village breathe around them, wounded, restored, hypocritical, beloved by some part of him he still distrusted for existing. "I met a man," he said, "who turned his pain into a system and thought that made it universal." Sakura let that settle. And Naruto was quiet. "And I was angry," he said at last. "More than I expected." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw beneath the blood and dust and strange composure something like disorientation. Not because he had lost himself, because he had found a piece of himself he had not properly accounted for. "About the village?" she asked. Naruto did not answer immediately then. "About home." The word sat between them like a truth neither had expected him to choose. Sakura reached out and after only the slightest hesitation took one of his shaking hands in both of hers. He let her. Above the village, in the places where politics survived every disaster because politics always did, Danzo began to move. Pain's invasion had broken structure. Broken structure invited claimants. Tsunade was spent. Power never remained ownerless for long. Naruto received the report about Sasuke killing Itachi and learning the truth of the Uchiha massacre before dawn the next day. He read it once, then he took out his notebook and began writing. Because somewhere ahead lay another confrontation, another ruined architecture built around another wound, another man who had found an answer and chosen the wrong shape for it. And because now, perhaps more than ever, Naruto understood that the most dangerous people in the world were not those who suffered. It was those who took the suffering, made a philosophy from it, and mistook the resulting structure for truth. He wrote until sunrise. Outside, Konoha rebuilt itself again because that too was what villages did. They burned, lied, grieved, revised their myths, and kept standing. Whether that made them resilient or merely repetitive remained, Naruto thought, an open question. He intended to keep asking it. Chapter 6. The last equation war revealed truths ordinary politics preferred to keep dressed. In peace, villages could afford mythology. They called their dead noble, their compromises necessary, their hypocrisies regrettable but temporary. They built monuments where guilt ought to have stood and taught children words like duty before those children were old enough to define consent. Peace allowed choreography, flags, cage summits, ceremonially tragic speeches, memory edited into usefulness. War removed the editing. By the third week of the Fourth Shinobi War, Naruto had concluded that most military structures were uglier up close than even his darker assumptions had predicted. Not because the Shinobi Alliance lacked courage. Courage was everywhere. In medics working through blood loss and collapsing sleep cycles. In low-ranking soldiers holding impossible lines because retreat would expose strangers they had never met. In commanders making decisions no one human should have been expected to carry alone. In exhausted runners still moving between fronts because a message delivered 3 minutes earlier might keep a platoon from becoming a statistic. No, the ugliness was elsewhere. In how fast large systems turned human beings into logistical abstractions. In how naturally the Alliance began speaking of acceptable losses once enough bodies filled the accounting categories. In how easily villages that had used one another as enemies for generations now spoke the language of unity while still tracking which units came from which flag. In the speed with which idealism, under sufficient pressure, reverted to numbers. Naruto stood inside that machinery the way a blade stood inside a wound. Useful, undeniable, and impossible to ignore for long. He was not its symbol. That role belonged, against his will, to older stories still trying to write him. The Nine Tails Jinchuriki, the hero of Pain's invasion, the son of prophecy if one preferred one's politics with cosmic garnish. Naruto rejected all of it. Or rather, he treated symbolic status the same way he treated any other environmental hazard, as something real, inconvenient, and best understood before it could distort the field too badly. Tsunade had returned only partially to active authority. Recovery took time even for monsters like her. The War Council, therefore, had become a many-headed structure of military necessity and restrained panic. The Reikage wanted decisive deployment. The Tsuchikage distrusted everything that moved. Gaara, to Naruto's private fascination, carried leadership like a man who had learned exactly how much violence intimacy could hold and survive. Kakashi served as interpreter more often than commander. Shikaku Nara did strategic work at a level that would have made lesser men look mystical. Shikamaru, grim and older around the eyes now, had begun becoming his father in all the ways that happened too soon. And in the middle of their endless deliberations sat Naruto, cross-legged on tables he was not supposed to sit on, refusing tea until the maps improved, quietly unbearable. You cannot just redeploy an entire division because you have a feeling. One sand strategist snapped during the third major command dispute. Naruto didn't look up from the terrain model. It isn't a feeling, it's structural prediction. That is a phrase you invented to make insubordination sound thoughtful. Naruto tapped the map once. Madara's forces keep applying pressure where your defensive thinking assumes frontal escalation. They are not testing strength, they are testing certainty. Another tap. This ridge line is treated as secure because it is tactically inconvenient to breach, which means it is where a mind like his will strike to prove that inconvenience is not the same thing as impossibility. The strategist bristled. 3 hours later, the ridge line came under exactly that kind of pressure. No one apologized. Naruto did not require it. He had, over the course of the war, become the Alliance's most infuriatingly reliable weapon, not because he was strongest in simple terms, though by then simple terms had begun failing as descriptions, but because he refused to let anyone mistake doctrine for reality. Where commanders thought in categories, Naruto thought in seams. Where other shinobi responded to force, he responded to assumptions inside force. This made him valuable. It also made him exhausting. You know, Kakashi said once in a lull between fronts, while both of them stood ankle-deep in a field churned to red mud and memory, most people become easier to work with when they mature. Naruto looked at him. Kakashi's visible eye bent in a smile. You became more correct. That is not the same as more difficult. It is, Kakashi said. Almost exactly. Still, the war needed him. White Zetsu's mimicry required minds quick enough to distrust pattern at speed. Reanimated shinobi required fighters capable of respecting legacy without freezing before it. Tailed beast clashes required not merely power, but someone who understood that vast systems of chakra were not fundamentally mystical. They were architectures of intent and energy that could, under sufficient reading, be interrupted. Kurama's place in all this deepened. What had once been conditional exchange had become something stranger and stronger. Not harmony, exactly, but partnership as an act of mutual clarity. The fox no longer withheld old contempt, but he no longer used it as distance either. Naruto, in turn, no longer approached Kurama as a resource wrapped in personality. He approached him as himself, ancient, furious, lonely, precise in his own brutal way. They did not become sentimental. They became honest. The seal space changed with that honesty. The bars remained. Naruto did not insult either of them by pretending history disappeared, because understanding grew. But the red dark chamber no longer felt like imprisonment alone. It felt like an archive, a place where old force and new mind met without lying to one another about what either contained. At the height of the early war, when entire sectors were folding under synchronized assaults, and the air itself seemed made of smoke, Naruto entered the seal space between one battlefield and the next with his chakra reserves hanging low, and his bones already carrying next week injuries. Kurama watched him from behind the gate, massive eyes reflecting ember light that existed nowhere else. "You are overextending," the fox said. "Yes, you say that as though awareness replaces correction. Often it improves it." Kurama made the deep, rough sound that in him had become the equivalent of snorting. "The Alliance is using you badly." Naruto sat cross-legged in the shallow water. "Yes," the fox's tails shifted once against stone. "Then why permit it?" Naruto looked up at him. "Because they are trying to solve a world-sized problem with institutions built for smaller dishonesty," he said. "That interests me." Kurama was quiet for a moment. Then, "It is also killing them." "Yes, you are a terrible optimist." Naruto actually smiled at that. "No," he said. "I am a terrible realist. You simply mistake continued engagement for optimism." Kurama stared at him for several seconds, then lowered his head closer to the bars. "Take more," he said. Naruto's expression sharpened. "Your chakra!" The fox bared his teeth, not threateningly exactly. More like emphasis. "Do not make me repeat acts of generosity. It cheapens them." Naruto bowed his head once. When he rose from meditation, the battlefield greeted him with fresh screaming and a crimson geometry so dense around his shoulders that even allied shinobi stepped back without meaning to. This was no longer the partial catalyst framework Jiraiya had first seen years earlier. This was war evolved. Kurama's chakra and Naruto's structural logic had found each other under pressure so intense that the resulting manifestation looked less like power up and more like system activation at a cosmic scale. Vast crimson arrays unfolded behind him in layered rings and interlocking lines. Their rotation synchronized with chakra flow so precisely that the air itself seemed to acquire angles. Where Kanon had a golden cloak of overflowing heroic force, this Naruto moved inside a lattice of deliberate apocalypse. Red, exact, terrifyingly beautiful. The Allied soldiers who witnessed it later struggled to describe what frightened them most. Not that he looked like a monster. That he looked like a conclusion. Sasuke returned in the war's later phase not with fanfare, but with a disturbance in the field so distinct that Naruto knew it before he saw him. Some presences announced themselves through scale. Sasuke's announced itself through pressure, sharpened to a single edge. The battlefield where they met again lay under a sky split by smoke and unnatural light, the ground scarred by jutsu large enough to insult geography. Naruto had just finished helping neutralize a reanimated cage unit by forcing it into internal conflict with its own regeneration conditions, when the first flare of black fire bloomed at the horizon and cut a line through advancing enemy formations like judgment written in heat. Then Sasuke was there, older again. Harder. the eternal Mangekyo giving his gaze a depth that no longer resembled ordinary human looking. His darkness had not lessened, it had crystallized. Around him moved the afterimages of decisions taken too far to be recalled politely. The Alliance reacted with immediate fracture. Weapons lifted. Orders snapped. Distrust flooded the field faster than enemy pressure. Naruto stepped forward before anyone else could make the moment simpler than it was. For a heartbeat, the battlefield seemed to narrow around the two of them. Not because others vanished, but because everyone present understood, instinctively, that this was not merely the return of a powerful missing nin. It was the re-entry of an unresolved equation into a war already failing to contain the variables it had. Sasuke's gaze met Naruto's. No smile, no threat, no wasted surface. "You found an answer," Naruto said. That was not what anyone expected. Sasuke's eyes narrowed slightly. "You always say the wrong thing first." Naruto ignored the soldiers shifting behind him, the cage watching from fractured lines of command, Sakura arriving at the edge of the scene with blood on her gloves and a look that held equal parts hope and dread. "It's the wrong answer," Naruto said calmly. "But you found one." Sasuke's voice dropped lower. "You think this is still philosophy?" "No," Naruto said. "I think it became philosophy when you chose to build from it." There, on a battlefield where nations were currently trying to avoid annihilation through committee and desperation, the two of them had the closest thing either would ever allow to an intimate conversation. "You want to destroy Konoha," Naruto said. "That may even be proportionate in one reading of what it did to your clan, but you still aren't doing it for the reason you claim." His gaze remained level. "You are still that child in the street asking why this happened to him." The words struck like physical force. Sakura flinched. Kakashi closed his visible eye. Sasuke's chakra rose at once, dark and immense. Naruto did not retreat. "Destruction is only beautiful," he said quietly, "when it is honest, when it is a statement about what is. Not when it is a wound trying to speak through fire because it never learned any other language." Silence opened around them despite the war. Then Naruto held out not a hand but an offer. "Fight beside me," he said. "Not for Konoha, not for forgiveness. Not because any of these people deserve the comfort of thinking this war redeems them. Fight because when it is over, there may finally be enough ruin cleared away for you to decide what you actually want to build." He held Sasuke's gaze. "You are the only person I have ever met who might understand the question." No one moved. Sasuke stood there for a long time, the whole battlefield waiting on a decision it could not meaningfully influence. Then, without a word, he turned, not toward Konoha, toward the enemy lines. It was enough. Their alliance thereafter was not friendship. That word was too small and too sentimental for what existed between them. They fought side by side as parallel philosophies under temporary convergence. Sasuke did not soften. Naruto did not domesticate himself into heroism. But each recognized in the other a mind too sharpened by pain to accept easy myths. The war made use of that convergence whether it understood it or not. Madara entered the center of history like a man insulted by all previous scales of ambition. From the moment Naruto truly engaged him, one thing became obvious. This was not merely a powerful shinobi. Power alone did not explain the texture of Madara's presence. He fought as though reality were a medium insufficiently obedient to his design. Every movement carried not just confidence, but aesthetic offense at the existence of resistance. That, more than the ocular techniques, or impossible reserve, or monstrous battlefield literacy, made him interesting. Madara did not simply want to win. He wanted to impose a completed interpretation of the world. The infinite Tsukuyomi, when Naruto fully grasped its conceptual architecture, offended him on a level deeper than most murders. Not because it would kill hope. Hope, in Naruto's view, had never been the most intellectually robust human offering, not even because it would erase freedom, though it plainly would. No, what enraged him was simpler and, in his own logic, worse. The Tsukuyomi was a lie enforced at planetary scale, an illusion presented as mercy. a false structure built on the assumption that one dreamer's imposed peace was superior to reality's difficult plurality. Madara had looked at a broken world and chosen not to strip away its dishonesty, but to replace it with a more comprehensive dishonesty and call that salvation. Aesthetically obscene, Naruto thought. Their battle reflected that disgust. This was the first fight in Naruto's life where raw scale actually threatened to outpace his structural approach. Madara's Susanoo, tailed beast control, godlike battlefield experience, and casual adaptation meant that no elegant trick alone would solve the problem. There are systems so large that one must first survive their size before one can meaningfully inspect their assumptions. So Naruto used more of Kurama than he ever had. The crimson arrays became enormous. They expanded not merely around his body, but across the field, intersecting with natural energy, terrain, and tailed beast scale force, until the battlefield looked less like war and more like some ancient machine of destruction being assembled in real time out of red light and mathematical spite. Against Madara's vast armored constructs, Naruto moved not as a hero challenging evil, but as a philosopher assaulting a theorem he found morally and structurally unacceptable. Sasuke matched him from the opposite angle, dark, lethal, ocular precision cutting where Naruto destabilized. They did not mirror one another. They triangulated. Madara, to his immense credit, found this delightful. "Good," he said once, standing amid shattered terrain and impossible chakra weather, eyes bright with the joy of finally facing something not boring. "At last, children who understand scale." Naruto wiped blood from his mouth with the back of one hand. "You mistake scale for completion." Madara laughed. That too was instructive, because in the end, even Madara's philosophy contained the same flaw all absolute systems did. Certainty had made him sloppy about his own assumptions. He believed himself beyond revision. He believed a perfected dream justified itself. He believed that if he held enough power, reality's resistance became mere delay. The flaw was not in his strength, it was in his premise. But before Naruto could finish that proof, history convulsed again. Kaguya's arrival did not feel like an escalation. It felt like category failure. Even Madara, for all his cosmic arrogance, still belonged to shinobi logic in the broad sense. He could be hated, admired, analyzed, trapped in motive. Kaguya entered the world like the original substrate of all those later systems, suddenly deciding to reject them. Her power was not simply greater, it was stranger. Space shifted as if dimensional geometry had become conversational. Terrain ceased behaving like terrain. The battlefield fractured into realms whose laws treated human tactics as quaint local habits. Most of the alliance became irrelevant instantly, not through cowardice. Through scale, Naruto did not. Because while others saw an incomprehensible goddess, he saw what he had always looked for, the assumption at the center of the system. Kaguya was not merely a being. She was the original architecture from which chakra in this world had propagated, the first source, the oldest imposed structure. She regarded human beings the way empires regarded villages, as temporary, noisy arrangements growing across something they had mistaken for theirs. Naruto found this fascinating and offensive, because at the heart of her existence lay a premise older than Madara's, but spiritually similar. That power originating first conferred the right to determine all later forms. That possession, priority, and scale justified command over reality's descendants. No, Naruto thought. That is only another lie with a better lineage. The final battle drew on everything he had become. Sage perception to read impossible shifts in environment. Kurama's chakra as catalyst and scale reserve. His own years of structural thinking, now honed enough that even dimensional instability could be treated not as incomprehensible chaos, but as system behavior under altered laws. Sasuke's ocular precision and darkness functioning beside him rather than against him. Sakura's strength and timing, often overlooked by histories too eager to narrate women as support rather than impact. becoming decisive at moments when brute, honest force mattered more than abstraction. Kakashi impossibly still being Kakashi. Wounded, half broken by grief and politics and fatherhood toward children never meant to survive this much, and still moving when movement was required. Kaguya changed dimensions to break their models. Naruto adapted models. She overwhelmed with scale. He searched for center. She struck from impossible angles. He stopped thinking of angles as fixed. At one point, suspended in a realm of crystalline ice and black sky where gravity itself felt undecided, Naruto understood the final principle. Every system, everyone, from village ideology to bloodline pride to tailed beast imprisonment to dream world salvation to godhood, protected not merely its structure, but the assumption it could not survive being questioned. The final victory, therefore, could not be mere overpowering. That would only replace one scale with another. Nor could it be friendship or destiny or inherited hope. Those were stories, and while stories sometimes guided hands usefully, they were not honest enough to serve as first principles here. No, the solution had to be what it had always been. Find the assumption. Challenge it. The exact technical mechanism by which Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi forced that final opening would later be narrated badly by surviving witnesses and lied about more elegantly by official histories. Sealed geometry, space-time interruption, dimensional overlap timing, chakra vector collapse at origin point. All of these were true enough to satisfy engineers and insufficient to satisfy poets. Naruto himself, asked years later in one rare moment of patience, would say only, "She believed the world beneath her would always remain substrate." And that was enough. When Kaguya fell, sealed, displaced, removed from the field of immediate human consequence, the war did not end in celebration so much as in stunned, atmospheric collapse. The pressure that had held reality in a fist released. Sound came back wrong at first. Then gravity. Then the ordinary, unbearable human tasks. Breathing, counting survivors, finding the living beneath the dead, deciding how to stand in a world not yet sure it still wanted standing. The battlefield after Kaguya looked unreal, not because it was clean. It wasn't. It was wreckage on a mythic scale. Broken stone, shattered tree lines, scorched earth, torn dimensions still bleeding strange residue into space. But in places, where chakra upheaval had peaked and then frozen into matter, the ground had changed. Crystalline formations rose from the ruined landscape in jagged luminous clusters, as if the world itself had briefly become glass under sufficient heat and pressure, and had not entirely remembered how to revert. Light moved through them in impossible colors. The whole wasteland glittered like the aftermath of an explosion, so precise it had made beauty and devastation inseparable. Naruto stood alone among those formations for a long time after the others moved off to do what people always did after surviving the impossible. Tend the wounded, make lists, hold one another upright, begin inventing the next order too early. He looked at the crystals, at the rubble between them, at the sky cleared now of false moons and imposed dreams. His breathing had steadied. His body hurt everywhere. Kurama was quiet inside him, not asleep exactly, but carrying the immense old fatigue of a creature who had fought at the edge of his own scale and not lied about enjoying parts of it. Footsteps approached over shattered ground. Sakura came to stand beside him. She had blood on her sleeve, not all of it hers, and dust in her hair and a cut across one cheek she had not yet noticed because she was, as ever, too busy being necessary to stop and become symbolic. She followed his gaze over the crystalline wasteland. "It's beautiful," Naruto said. Sakura took a slow breath. "The crystals? The world," he said softly. That made her turn. Naruto's gaze remained forward. "When all the stories are burned away," he said. "When there's no will of fire, no cycle of hatred, no prophecy, no cage performing righteousness for history's memory, just this." He gestured lightly toward the wreckage and glass. "What's actually here?" Sakura looked out again. "It's also rubble," she said. Naruto nodded. "Yes." A long silence unfolded. In the distance, voices carried. Orders. Laughter from someone half hysterical with relief. The sound of people discovering they were still alive and having no graceful vocabulary for it. Sakura asked, "What do you do now?" That question, more than the war or Kaguya or Madara, finally reached the part of Naruto he had spent years circling without naming. Because for so long he had defined himself against structures. Village lies, inherited violence, ideological fraud, systems claiming absoluteness they had not earned. Even his acts of loyalty had often taken the shape of conditional protection rather than belonging. Now the largest equations had ended. The world had not become kind, it had become open. Naruto considered the crystalline horizon with the same seriousness he had once brought to chalk circles on alley dirt and seals under bathroom floors and the hidden assumptions inside gods. Then he said the most honest thing available. "I don't know." Sakura smiled faintly. Not because the answer was comforting, because it was real, Naruto almost smiled too. "I find," he added after a moment, "that I'm curious to find out." That was as close to hope as he had ever allowed himself, not the childish hope of reward, not the institutional hope that villages weaponized. Something smaller, sharper, more durable, curiosity about a world no longer fully enclosed by old lies. When they returned to the others, the scene was exactly as human as he might have expected, and yet somehow more difficult to dismiss for that. Kakashi sat on a broken slab of stone as if fatigue had finally negotiated a binding contract with his spine. He looked up when Naruto approached, visible eye weary and impossibly gentle. Sasuke stood several paces away, not separate exactly, but still not among. Dark cloak torn, face bloodied. Presence unchanged in essence, though something in it had loosened. Not toward goodness, Naruto would never have insulted him with that simplification, but toward possibility, their eyes met. No grand reconciliation passed between them, no brotherhood, no oath, just recognition. You survived your answer long enough to ask a better question. It was enough for now. Far inside, Kurama stirred and settled. The war ended not with moral resolution, but with consequences. Villages would rebuild and lie and revise themselves again. Politicians would claim wisdom from losses that had mostly exposed incompetence. New structures would rise atop old fractures. Sasuke would still have his own road to walk, dark and difficult, and not made simple by shared victory. Sakura would go on becoming the kind of person who held collapsing worlds together so competently that history would try, as history often did, to understate the miracle. Kakashi would inherit burdens he had never wanted and wear them with the exhausted irony of a man too damaged to become noble cleanly. Tsunade would drink and survive and remain, against all odds, one of the few leaders capable of looking at reality without fainting into idealism. And Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki, the Crimson Alchemist, would never become Hokage. He had never wanted the title. Not because rule was beneath him, but because institutions petrified too easily around symbols, and Naruto distrusted any office whose authority depended on being loved more than understood. He would move through the post-war world differently. Sometimes ally, sometimes witness, sometimes corrective force when systems once again mistook their own stories for truth. Some called him hero, some called him threat. Some, in low voices, and only when speaking to people who had seen enough to know better, called him the most honest catastrophe their age had produced. Naruto accepted none of those titles and objected to none of them, because titles were usually only architecture for other people's comfort. On certain evenings, years later, he would return to places where the earth still held strange crystalline scars from the war and stand there in the fading light, hands in his pockets. Kurama quiet inside him, and look out over a world still trying very hard to narrate itself back into false simplicity. He would watch children running through rebuilt streets, watch diplomats making new lies in better clothes, watch veterans living with the cost in their faces, watch Sakura in hospitals and command rooms where competence had become its own kind of grace. Watch Sasuke pass at the edges of history like a blade that had not decided whether it belonged to a hand or only to motion. And sometimes he would think of the final battlefield, the rubble and the glass, the cloudless sky over a world briefly stripped of every decorative illusion. Beautiful, he had called it. He had meant it. Not because destruction was pure. Nothing human was pure. But because honesty, however severe, however costly, was the only beauty that did not require forgetting what it had consumed. That was enough for him. Perhaps it was everything.